roll?
Sure. Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Commissioner Banton. Commissioner Bradley.
Present.
Commissioner Fowler.
Present.
Commissioner Garmendia.
Present.
Commissioner Hubman.
Present.
Commissioner Keown.
Present.
Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Williams. Chair Boaz.
Present.
And you have a quorum of 7.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Next order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion?
Still moved.
Second?
Second.
Can we speak up? I can't hear.
Oh, sorry. If everybody could speak up so Michelle can hear you since she's down at the end of the table, but we have a motion from Commissioner Hubbard and a second from Commissioner Fowler.
Okay.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Commissioner Banton. Commissioner Bradley.
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia.
Aye.
Commissioner Keown.
Aye.
Commissioner Hubman.
Aye.
Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Chair Boaz.
Aye.
I almost said Strawberry. And the motion passes with 8 voting aye.
Thanks so much. We have 8, or we have 7.
Oh, we're up to 8.
8 with.
Oh, sorry. Didn't even see you come in. Good to see you. All right. So we have 2 action items and several informational presentations, plus 1 additional item on our minutes.
So I suggest to approve the minutes from Don Rao, Executive Director of the agency. You just approved the minutes from last time. And the last meeting, remember the last meeting was the approval of the sloop. Ta-da. So important things happen in this room, which we did last time, approved the new sloop. And we often say that what's on the back wall of these maps that are legal documents. So yes, this new sloop became a legal document from your vote at 6:57 p.m. Last February 12th. And there it is, taking its place on the wall. The documents are here below, an example of all this. And following that Wednesday night, the mayor's cabinet met here, and to remind them that we have enacted that as the new sloop. We showed it on the wall, gave a little sayonara to the old sloop, said bye-bye, and then reminded everybody that's up next is the whole overhaul of the zoning code. So congratulations for everybody that worked hard in creating the sloop. And of course, now that it is a legal document, it's in effect. So just a little sidebar.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. The first action item is a rezoning, which does include a public hearing. If you were here in the room or online, if you'd like to speak during the public hearing, please, if you're online, post your name in the chat. If you're here, we are taking names over at the desk, correct? All right. And we'll recognize you at the appropriate time. If you're on the phone, please listen carefully as I'll need you to speak up at the appropriate time. Please note you may need to press *6 to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Each individual who wants to speak will get 2 minutes. And that is our only public hearing for this evening. All right. Ready for the staff presentation?
All right. Good evening, commissioners. It's a pleasure to see you all. I know we have a packed agenda. I will move swiftly, with all due deference to the petitioners related to this zoning who are joining us on the call this evening. So go ahead, Dylan. Or can I click? I never remember. Can I? All right, there we go. You might have to drive for me. So this is a proposed rezoning. The purpose is to review and recommend the rezoning of a portion of a parcel involved in a boundary adjustment between 2 adjoining parcels. And the action is to find the petition for the proposed rezoning for the parcel in question to be in conformity with the strategic land use plan and therefore recommend approval to the Board of Aldermen. Describing the site briefly, only one parcel will be partially rezoned, but there are two parcels in question because this is related to a boundary adjustment. The two parcels are 4535 South Grand and 4533 South Grand at the intersection of Grand Boulevard and Taft Avenue. The portion of the subject parcel that is proposed for the rezoning is roughly 6 feet by 82 feet. The boundary adjustment is proposed in order to bring the parcel lines in conformity with the existing conditions. The subject parcel, 4535, is currently in the F Neighborhood Commercial District. The portion of the subject parcel in question will be rezoned to the A Single Family Dwelling District to accommodate the boundary adjustment. Next slide, Dill. Just some high level stuff because I am going to move a little bit quickly. Things to keep in mind. The zoning is related to a boundary adjustment. It is just a small portion of the subject parcel. That small portion will be subsumed into the adjoining parcel 4533. The portion being rezoned does not intersect with the front lot line of either property, and the portion of the subject parcel is being downzoned, that is decreased entitlement from the F to the A districts. Go ahead, Dylan. Take a look at the site themselves. South Grand is on the bottom of the site plan here. As I stated, it's roughly 6 feet by 82-foot strip at the back right of the subject parcel. The portion includes part of the backyard of 4533 South Grand. The two owners of the parcels kind of always thought that this piece of land belonged to 4533 South Grand. There is a portion of that backyard along with a retaining wall and a fence that extend across the property line. With this rezoning, no change in land use is expected, and the rezoning would not have a significant impact on the use, access, or potential redevelopability of either parcel. Next slide. As you can see, with our current zoning here, as I stated, 4535 is in pink there. That's the F Neighborhood Commercial District. And 4533 is that yellow A Single Family Dwelling District. Technically on this small portion of the property, the entitlements will be reduced, but the impact will be negligible. The use on the piece of land in question is going to continue to be in alignment with the A Single Family Dwelling District. Next slide. As always, we make sure these rezonings are in alignment with the strategic land use plan. Sorry to steal Don's thunder. We're actually not yet using the new sloop for this proposal because the permit was applied for and they applied for the rezoning before the adoption of the new 2025 strategic land use plan. Not a huge issue in this case, considering the size and the context. Both zoning districts are compatible with this designation. And just because we're fun, reviewing it against, next slide, Dylan, against the 2025 strategic land use plan. Similar thing, the subject parcel and the adjoining parcel are both within a medium intensity corridor. These are areas that are pedestrian focused with buildings that front the street, feature a mix of uses and many types of housing, including some single unit buildings. There would be a much more detailed review of this rezoning if we were actually referencing the 2025 strategic land use plan, but we have that to look forward to in the future. The proposed rezoning would be compatible with this designation. Next slide. The next 8 slides are all current context site photos. We're going to click through them real quick. They're in your packet. These are just here for reference should anybody have any questions. But next, I'm going to bring up the petitioner who is joining us online to share some words. All right, Laura, if you're online, this is your opportunity to go. Laura Hedrick is representing the 2 owners of record on these 2 lots, and she might provide.
Had just unmuted me. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Hi all. Thank you for letting us represent this case. And I just wanted to let you know I'm here on behalf of both owners for 4533 and 4535. And I just like, as they're going through some of the pictures, I just wanted to let you know kind of why we're rezoning this strip, and it's because a wall was built because there's a pretty steep incline, a pretty steep drop off that, yeah, I'll get to the pictures eventually, of why this was done. And obviously it was installed many, many years ago. And the current owner at 4533 is just wanting to make it a part of their land. He's getting to the pictures here almost soon. There's the wall right there. And then when he goes to the next picture, it's going to show that drop off on the other side of it. Sorry, one more. Keep going. Okay, more. Keep going more. That right there. Go back one. They're right there. Yeah. So you can kind of see on the other side of that brick wall, kind of the huge drop off there. So we're just kind of letting them know the scape of the land, that kind of why that was probably built. Does anybody have any questions about anything?
I think no question.
We'll do questions
Yeah, we'll
after
do
the
questions
public hearing.
later.
Okay. I also have Alyssa here, which is the owner of 4533. If anybody needs to ask her any questions, she can come into the conversation if needed.
Great, thank you, Laura.
Any other staff comments or?
Nope,
Nope.
zoning, do you want to feel the need to chime in?
Nope.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we need to open the public hearing. Do I have a motion? Second?
A second.
All right. We have a motion by Commissioner Hubman, sorry. Bradley. And a second by Commissioner Garmendia. Call for vote?
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Clark Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Banton. Commissioner Bradley. Commissioner Fowler.
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia.
Aye.
Commissioner Keown.
Aye.
Commissioner Hubman.
Aye.
Commissioner Miller.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Chair Boaz.
Aye.
And the motion passes with all present voting aye.
The public hearing is now open. Again, I either need you listed on the sheet at the desk, or if you're on the phone, please, or I mean, if online, please enter your name on the chat. Do I have anyone registered? Anyone online in the chat? Nope. All right. And we now can close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right. Again, a motion by Commissioner. Oh, sorry, who was that online?
Oh,
So you have a motion by Commissioner Bradley. A second by-
okay. Yes, I'm now unmuted. This is 4531 or 29 South Grand. That's all. I just said to put who's present.
Are you here to provide some comment for the public hearing portion of this?
I am not, just observing.
Okay, thanks so much. All right, so I have a motion by Commissioner Bradley, a second by Commissioner Garmendia to close the public meeting.
Here.
Previous roll. Any objections to previous roll? No? All right, the public meeting is closed. All right, now we have any questions from the commissioners? I guess just do me a favor and raise your hands if you have a question. No? No? Anyone online with questions from the commissioners? All right, we have no questions from the commissioners. Do I have a motion?
Do I read the recommendation?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I didn't actually print it. Dylan, can you go to the recommendation slide? Oh, all the way at the bottom, pardon me. After public hearing. There we go. So the official recommendation from staff is that the planning commission finds the petition for the proposed zoning district map amendment for the parcel in question to be in conformity with the strategic land use plan and therefore recommends approval to the Board of Aldermen.
A motion. All right, Commissioner Huffman is the second. Call for vote.
Alderman Cone?
Hey,
Alderman Cone?
I got kicked off the call. I just rejoined. Can someone please let me know what we're discussing?
Okay, we're doing the petition for the rezoning, and staff has recommended approval. And we have a motion and a second to approve. So we're now in the process of calling roll.
Okay, I,
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard?
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley?
Aye.
Commissioner Fowler?
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia?
Aye.
Commissioner Keon?
Aye.
Commissioner Hubman?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Chair Boaz?
Aye.
And the motion passes with all present voting aye.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much. All right, we're now going to proceed to the review of the Morgan Ford Road demolition. Mary?
Right, so I'll just briefly, very briefly introduce the item, mainly to explain the flow of how it'll go. This is an uncommon type of item to reach the preservation board, the planning commission. So I wanted to explain a little bit and also acknowledge that Rasmus is sitting in on the commission for this item. Grace Keong has recused herself for this item. So this action item before us tonight is a review of a preservation board decision regarding the denial of a demolition permit for addresses on Morgan Ford. And so at a previous meeting, the planning commission decided to take up this review. That was the first step in this procedure. Now, here we are tonight conducting the review. And the purpose of this item is to kind of review that full record that was before the preservation board and then, yeah, Dylan, if you would switch to the next slide. The commission has several actions kind of available to them, different decisions they could make. And I'll note the commission is not accepting new testimony, public testimony on this item tonight because the purpose of this review is simply to review the record as it was before the preservation board. So for anybody online or in person who is intending to provide testimony, we cannot accept that tonight, but we welcome you to stay on and observe the meeting if you would like. So tonight, after presentations from Cultural Resources Director Bettis and the appellant in this case, the commission will discuss, and there are 4 possible actions. Number 1, to uphold the preservation board's decision. In other words, to deny the demolition. Number 2, to overturn the preservation board's decision. In other words, to approve the demolition. Number 3, to modify the preservation board's decision, such as by adding conditions on approval of the demolition. And number 4, this, by the way, is kind of a variation on options 1 through 3, is to continue the item until April. The planning commission, once it begins review, must render a decision within 30 days. The next standing meeting of the planning commission does fall within that 30-day window. Should it be helpful to kind of return to this, for example, to review potential modifications after a period of greater deliberation and discussion. So that is simply all I wanted to do to introduce this item and the options before the commission. And with that, I'll turn it back to Chair Boaz.
Madam Chair, let me just make one clarification as you know, this is somewhat more formal than what we normally do, is as we introduced that Rasmuth has joined us. It is from the mayor's office position that Grace is normally in. The mayor has entered legal written notice to us that she's substituting Rasmuth here, Rasmuth Jorgensen, as her representative on the mayor's representative on the planning commission for this item. Just put that in the record that that letter from the mayor will be in part of the file. So proceed, you can proceed now.
I think really my comments are more to restate some of the things that Miriam has already presented, but to, first off, I thank everyone for reviewing this rather lengthy record. I know some of you have also listened to the recording, so I appreciate all the efforts that you put into that.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
we can barely hear you online.
sorry. Let me try that again. I'm going
That's
to
much better. Thank
Okay, sure. Thanks for saying so. All right, so I'm just going to restate a couple of things that Miriam has said in her introduction, that we are here to review the decision that was made. She nicely outlined our 4 options to make decisions. I want to thank everyone for reviewing the very detailed information that was provided, and I know some of you also listened to the recordings as well. We just need to remember that we need to limit our questions and our comments to items that are in the record, and I know both Miriam and David will help keep us on track with that. Does anyone have any questions about how to proceed on this?
I do have a question about the approval with conditions. Do we specify the conditions in this meeting if we approve with conditions, or is that like a latter conversation?
I think that's a speculative, I guess I would describe it as that. So as we come across an issue that we think we want investigated, or conditions that we discuss and bring up, then we'll just figure that out as we go. I think the conversation will kind of lead us there or not, depending on how the questions take place. Is that a good?
So I guess what I'm imagining could happen is that different commissioners could have different conditions that their approval is contingent upon. Do we have to agree on the conditions?
I assume
order
so.
to-
We'd have to vote to,
The decision of the commission has to be of a majority of its members.
Including the conditions? of
Correct.
the approval?
If that's the option you go.
So if people have conditions to offer, we could vote on them as a body, one by one, and then have, in theory, a package of.
yes, I think that sounds correct. All right. All right, Mr. Bettis, please proceed.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me online? Alderman Cohn, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right, I am right at the microphone, so if this works. Just so you know, when this came to you last month, we met and discussed this item, I was planning on having a lengthy presentation for you, but to stay within the guardrails of what's going on, I actually watched the last presentation and it was really brief. So just so you guys understand, what I'm going to present to you is brief. You can ask me all the questions you like, of course, which was within the staff report and what's been given to you. But it was a really brief presentation. It was actually given to the board at this last hearing. So,
And would you be so kind as to formally introduce yourself and state that you will be, your statements will be true?
of course, and Bob Bettis, I'm the director of the Cultural Resources Office, and I will be giving the truth. My testimony is the truth. Okay, so this is the subject project. It's for the demolition of these 3 buildings for the construction of a 4-story apartment building. Just quick background on a timeline. The Preservation Board saw the original review as a preliminary review back in July of 23. At that time, the board withheld approval. The applicants in August of 24 applied for physical demolition permits for review. Our office denied those applications, and the board heard the item in September of 24, at which time the board again upheld the denial of our office. So again, these are the buildings in question. Our office has purview because of 2 things. The buildings are within the Oak Hill National Register District. Each 3 of these buildings are considered properties that contribute to that district. And this is also within a preservation review district. So the ordinances which were spelled out in the minutes, those delineate our power and explain why those areas are under our purview for demolition. So that's the background for that. Okay, the first house, this was, first I want to go back really quick. When we saw the project in 23 and then again 24, there was no change to the conditions of the building or to the proposal itself. So a lot of these slides have pics from 23 and from 24 from the last presentation. Single-family house at 3146 Morgan Ford, built in 1895. Commercial building also built in 1895 from 23. And then there's another shot. And then this building at the end, which built in 1901, excuse me. So those are the three buildings in question. Each building, again, are part of the historic district. They all contribute to the district, and they were all considered sound under our ordinance. The ordinance that the Preservation Board uses for review states that the building can essentially withstand another 6 months under its own weight in its walls. So their definition of soundness is pretty vague. It doesn't get into its interior condition. It's just, will it stand for 6 more months? So the three buildings in question. And here's a shot of that building. At the last Preservation Board meeting, Jan, who gave the item, she's in our office, Jan Cameron, who's in our office, gave the presentation and noted that there really wasn't any change in the condition except to the building at 3150, where there was some additional roof damage and some gutter issues on the south side of the building. And you can kind of see that here a little bit. It's not as clear on the right side because it's kind of washed out with the lights. But again, it's pretty much the exact same conditions from 23 to 24. The next part of this is the context of the streetscape and the neighborhood around it. Part of the criteria we look at contemplates what's being proposed and what is on the streetscape. The south side of this block is pretty much 2-story and 1-story brick commercial buildings. All the buildings on that side of the block do contribute to the Oak Hill National Register District. So it's an entire block face that's intact, small scale, walkable, and the existing buildings have that same architectural character. And again, this is walking south on the street, showing some more of the existing buildings, and then looking back towards the subject site, which shows 2 of the buildings, and then you can kind of, the buildings recessed obviously a little bit, but that's the actual site where the proposed 4-story building would go. We'll note that there is contemporary buildings on Morgan Ford. The MoFo building, for instance, did not come before the Preservation Board, and there really was no design review on that because the building on the site before was a 1984 car wash. It's a wonderful place, but the way our ordinance reads, the building was not historic. So when this came up for demolition, obviously there wasn't any kind of applicable criteria to review the MoFo building at that time when it went through. So yes, you do see things on the block, but they did not come under us for review. So again, some more context, majority of Morgan Ford in this stretch, 2-story, 1-story, walkable. And this is across the street to the west, same thing, more of the same kind of context. And again, more additional context showing the site and the surrounding area. This is a 1903 Sanborn fire insurance map showing the site. It's the 3 buildings in pink at the bottom. It's just to kind of give you kind of historic context of the site, that they've been around a long time. And this just kind of gives you a sense of that block, how it built up actually, as you went more to the north, you had some commercial infill and other properties filling in. So that gives you that historic context of the site. So this is the proposal. As Jan mentioned in her presentation, I will not get into a detailed description of what is being proposed. What I will note at this time is that we look at material, we look at scale, we look at how it fits with the streetscape. And the building itself, it's metal cladding with some stone or concrete cladding. Majority of the building stock is obviously brick. The scale of the building is 4 stories, again, which is counter to the rest of the streetscape, with except MoFo would be the exception, 2-story walkable. The first floor, there's not a lot of walkability to it. You have mostly a blank wall that's concealing parking. There is a corner entrance for the lobby, but the building, given its scale, given how it's on the site and its lack of activation of the streetscape, kind of makes it feel it's contrary to what is there in that built environment. So again, this kind of shows you, again, the existing condition versus what's proposed. And so again, when we look at those criteria, what's being proposed definitely does not meet a lot of the criteria within the ordinance. So at the last meeting, we did recommend that the board uphold our denial, and they did so. So that's really all that was given previously, so I can answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I'm going to go down the list that I have of the commissioners so we can ask questions, Mr. Bettis. Then we'll move on to the applicant's presentation and ask questions of them after their presentation. So Alderman Cone, do you have questions?
I don't have any questions at this time. I'd like to hear from the applicants as well. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard?
I like the way they are here.
Okay. Should I continue through the list or would you all like to? Okay, all right, we'll hold this way as well. All right, we'll hold. And if you would please go ahead and introduce yourselves and make the statement that all your comments will be truthful.
Absolutely. So my name is Robert Maltby. I'm with AHM Group. I'm one of the principals of AHM Group. My statements will be true.
Brian Pratt, also with AHM Group, one of the principals of the firm, and I will tell the truth.
So first and foremost, Brian and I would like to thank the staff for taking a considerable amount of time and effort to put together the transcript and all the materials for this presentation. We're grateful for that, and we know that this is a non-standard process for everyone. So thank you. So I think most folks here are well aware of the intent of our project. Our goal here was, and I won't dwell too much on the details, is to add density to the Morgan Ford Business District, in particular, the properties at 3146 through 3150 Morgan Ford. Our hope is to add 36 one-bed, one-bath apartment units with the goal of adding new density to the city of St. Louis and bringing in approximately 40 to 50 new residents to the neighborhood that would help support the existing businesses and the ongoing stability and growth of the Tower Grove neighborhood. This does require, in our opinion, the replacement and demolition of functionally obsolete structures, which would considerably impact the tax district. This project, I should note, does not seek any incentives from the city of St. Louis. I've sort of covered this. The one aspect of this that we, in tandem with public engagement, was including a 1-to-1 parking ratio by code for residential units and ensuring that the parking for this building was contained off street and within the confines of the footprint. So this process began in 2022. We reached out to the then alderperson, Megan Green, who directed us through the sort of generally prescribed practices of the Tower Grove Neighborhood Association. We did a preliminary outreach to the Tower Grove Neighborhood Committee, Tower Grove South Neighborhood Committee in 2022, and then did 2 subsequent presentations, one to the Morgan Ford Business District and adjacent homeowners and renters in early 2023, and then a subsequent presentation to the Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association. I believe that was in March of 2023. During that time, we then obtained both written support of the Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association. Of their survey results, about 68% of residents were in favor of the project. And based on that, we did receive a letter of support from Alderperson Velasquez. And throughout this process, we've continued to get ongoing communication and letters of support from individual businesses and other stakeholders, as well as residents of the neighborhood. This should all be within the transcript and the written record. So the existing site footprint is 11,000 square feet, and our goal here is to continue to create an infill development, sorry, not infill development, a development that mimics some of the infill development that we have at 3172 Morgan Ford and 3201 Morgan Ford, which is currently occupied. As you can see here, the existing conditions, I don't think I need to belabor anymore the pictures, as we've already seen those. Our preliminary project cost is about $11.4 million for this. We may expect this to go up a little bit with any tariffs, when ultimately we build. But this is based on our most recent, thank you, John, for laughing. That's based on our
Other guy.
Yeah. Yeah. This is based on a most recent completed project of 3201, where it's about $316,000 per unit to construct. This is a preliminary design concept. It should be noted during the outreach process with the neighborhood committee and various public engagement that we as the owner and developer were willing to collaborate with various neighborhood stakeholders in order to help possibly help change the look of the street facing greenscape that you see right now. That is just purely a preliminary design concept. The materials we selected, our architect did a survey of the neighborhood and found that it was primarily masonry as indicated, but there were also elements of steel, limestone, which is the lighter colored material, and obviously glass. So this material will primarily be steel, limestone, and glass if built. And I'll keep going through here so you can see sort of various resident amenity decks and the general look and feel and the massing of the property. As you can see from the site footprint and site plan, we don't have the room to provide retail, and within our public engagement process, we receive support based on the 1-to-1 parking ratio, primarily as a precedent from our two past projects at 3172 Morgan Ford and 3201 Morgan Ford, where we do have a 1-to-1 off-street parking ratio that does not impact the current parking as it stands. So with the current setup of the property as it stands, based on our renderings and massing, we have about 62 feet of enclosed parking area from the north edge of the building. This represents about 17% of the entire block from Hartford to the north to Juniata. And we believe that the lobby entrance will continue to sort of encourage ongoing pedestrian activation by building up to the lot lines. And as you can see, we have had some combination of communication and with collaborative approval of neighborhood for various things that would mask or enhance the parking component, either whether that's art, lighting, or green wall. And so just for a reference point, this is our project at 3201 Morgan Ford, which is right at Morgan Ford in Wyoming. This is a 4-story building next to an existing 3-story building within a 1.5 to 2 block distance of our existing site here at 3150 Morgan Ford. As you can see, this has parking on the first floor that faces a glass storefront. So our goal here was to continue to create more density within this commercial district. Our hope is to bring about 40+ residents into the neighborhood that would then become patrons of local, existing, or perhaps new businesses. And our hope is to provide more diverse housing options for those living in the Tower Grove South neighborhood. There's a typo, it is Tower Grove South, not Tower Grove East, and activate, the streetscape through greenery. So our goal here is to provide a project that should create ongoing density within the city of St. Louis, and hopefully continue to support Tower Grove South neighborhood. Keep going. Brian.
At the Alderwoman's request, SLDC did an independent analysis of the tax impact of the current properties versus our proposed project, and the base taxes collected are estimated about $8,000. The annual average over the next 10-year post completion of the project would be about $105,000. So we'd have roughly 95,000 plus in new tax revenue resulting from this. Again, no incentives to be requested for the project. I want to touch on just a couple of items that were in the transcript from our audio presentation. This really concludes the component of the visual presentation again, which is on the record. We address the criteria that the Preservation Review Board is required to look at in our Q&A as well as in our presentation. And just want to reiterate that, criteria E2, which reads the integrity of the existing block face, and whether the proposed demolition will significantly impact the continuity and rhythm of structures within the block is a consideration. Our position is that the existing rhythm of the block is wildly inconsistent. There is no continuity. Adjacent to the project is the 7-Eleven property, which is 3160 Morgan Ford. 3144 Morgan Ford is a historic mixed-use building with 0 setback. We have 3136 Morgan Ford, which has a 20-foot setback, and then there are 4 properties with 0 setback: 3128, 3130, 3132, and 3144. So our project would actually create some continuity on the block face and align with those 0 setback properties. The other criteria was F2. And the staff report speaks to their position on these as well. And I do have those if you want me to go back to those. But F2 states that the proposed construction would equal or exceed the contribution of the structure to the integrity of the existing streetscape and block face. Again, our position is that the integrity of the existing block face is inconsistent in terms of height, setback, use, and architecture. There's both a combination of new, used, historic, non-historic, different materiality along the stretch of Morgan Ford, starting at Arsenal, heading almost down to the railroad tracks. Again, the proposed project would create continuity of the block face in terms of setbacks. And then the final criteria we wanted to address was for F.3, which states that the proposed construction will be architecturally compatible with the existing block face as to building setbacks, scale, articulation, and rhythm, overall architectural character, and general use of exterior materials or colors. At the time of the hearing, the draft sloop identified the Morgan Ford corridor as a medium intensity corridor land use designation. And I'll just read a couple of bullet points of what those guidelines are for that. It recommends a 3 to 5 story in height with unlimited residential units per parcel, a mix of newer and older buildings, many types of housing, especially multi-unit buildings, my emphasis, but and avoid parking in the front, which should not be allowed, or side yard, which is discouraged. Unrelated to the sloop is our position is the consistency of the block face. Again, from the new project will create a 0 setback. And some of the deviations of first floor, quote, pedestrian activities speak back to our community engagement process, where we work through a process of weighing retail commercial activation with the size of the site, the 1-to-1 parking ratio, the potential for off-street parking and its impact on the neighborhood, and ultimately the majority and the support of the neighborhood development group, as well as the support of the aldermen, speaks to the fact that the choice was made that the 1-to-1 parking was necessary, and given our site, we simply couldn't squeeze in any retail on the first floor and still accommodate that. So again, we're at 1-to-1 parking, and that was in response to the neighborhood ultimately, which in our presentation at both our pre-app to the Preservation Review Board and the same submittal was made back was a result of that guidance from the neighborhood. That's all we have to say for now until we get the Q&A going.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll go back to the commissioners for questions. Now go through the list. Alderman Cohn, would you like to start?
Thank you. So just curious, you have, just a recap, you have letters of support from 3 different neighborhood associations that either are part of this footprint or adjacent to it.
It's just one, Alderman Cohn, the Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association, but they do have a development committee that ultimately holds the neighborhood meetings, and we did participate in that. We have a letter of support from the Morgan Ford Business Association, or at least represents
It's individual business.
individual businesses within it. But there's only one association that provide a letter, which is the Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association. As directed by both alderwomen, as we overlap the terms of those, that was the neighborhood group we were to coordinate with for neighborhood input and support.
Okay, all right. thank you for that clarification. So, in addition to that, both for
All right, Alderman Cohn, you are breaking up pretty badly.
Alderwoman Green and current Alderwoman.
Alderman Cohn, you are breaking up really badly. We did not hear your response.
I said I'll let the other commissioners ask questions since I'm having difficulty with my reception.
Okay, thanks very much. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard? Okay, great. Let's see, Alderman Bradley. I don't know if I demoted or promoted him.
So I have a few questions, but first of all, Mr. Bettis, I have a question for you. So you were talking about the definition from the ordinance for the demo, and you yourself said it's very broad in its delivery. So that definition says a structure will stand for 6 months. So
Right.
can you tell me who did that assessment of those structures? Was it a structural engineer? And tell me a little bit about that assessment. Did you go in? Did you look at the foundations? Did you look at the roof? How did the assessment happen and by whom? And what were their credentials?
Sure. The initial assessment done in 23 was done by staff. We do that assessment, primarily by the former director, Meg Lusto. Essentially, we do know old buildings. That's one thing we do. Our staff has a collective 100+ years of experience in the preservation field. So we see buildings in much worse shape. We get a sense of what's going on. Some of these were occupied at the time of these reviews. We know that those would stand for at least 6 months. We did not see reports from engineer, but again, it's based on the experience of staff, looking at the structures, doing exterior investigation on it and making the determination that way.
Okay. So please don't take this personally.
No, please.
If you're not a licensed structural engineer, in my opinion,
Yeah.
you are not qualified to make that assessment. So that's just my 2 cents on that. So thank you for your answers. The next are for the gentleman from AHM. So you guys need a couple variances yet in order to, if this is all approved, in order to move forward, correct? Can you talk about those variances, what they are and where you are with those?
Sure. We've withheld pursuing a zoning only application to confirm the variances from the zoning staff. So this is our architect's interpretation, but in all likelihood, we're going to need a height variance and possibly a side yard setback variance. Maybe a unit mix in terms of unit count, area variance for the use. So those would be the 3 potential from our vantage point. And we would also need a plat consolidation ultimately, because we currently have 3 parcels, and clearly that would be necessary for those approvals also. Again, we've sort of withheld starting those processes until we had clarity around whether or not a demo would be.
And so where are you guys with those processes?
We have not initiated them pending the outcome of this hearing and appeal.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fowler, you're up next.
Thanks for your presentations, guys. It's a lot of information to go through, so I appreciate it. Question for AHM. You guys bought these properties over like in 2018, I think, from the record, I think sometime in that time frame. At that time when you bought the properties, it's from the record, it says that you guys basically bought them to renovate them maybe, or do some type of renovations to them. Is that true? Or, and then after that, you got to this point where, you determined that they weren't salvageable or you weren't able to do anything with them. I kind of want to go over that kind of process, and then, I guess we'll start there and then I'll have
Sure, yeah.
follow up.
So the timeline of this is the first building that was acquired by one of our principals who isn't here today. And that is 3146 Morgan Ford, and that was acquired in 2018. 3150, which is the building on the corner of Morgan Ford and Juniata, was 2019. And that was vacant. Both 3146 and 3150 was vacant at the time of acquisition, and 3148 was acquired after about a year and a half of negotiating with the former owner to assemble effectively 3 parcels of land for this development. So our intent, outside of our initial acquisition, which was not made by myself nor Brian, was always to create a single multifamily development on this site.
Okay. I think that, okay. I guess my thought, that's just kind of different than I think what was answered before. I think Commissioner Hamilton asked you guys the question during the preservation board. I think at that point, I think she asked you the question of, did you buy these to, go into and consolidate and maybe create a multifamily? And at that time, the answer was no.
I think we have used 2 architects on this project, and initially we had engaged Trivers, and that was probably in 2019 or 2020 to do the exact same multifamily development. So based on the timeline, my understanding and Brian's understanding is we've always wanted the assemblage of these parcels for this multifamily development.
Okay.
I think Kyle, our third partner, spoke to that timeline, and since he acquired the initial building, at the time he acquired that, there wasn't an intent. Ultimately, looking at the building and availability, 3150 being a nuisance property, after owning it, an acquisition was made, and at that point, conclusion was we need to go forward. So AHM, when we got involved, the first property is still owned individually by Kyle, even though he's a principal of us. So that might be when he answered that question, maybe the distinction here.
All right. Don't really have any questions, I guess, for you guys. I see the momentum you guys are doing. But the other 2 buildings, now this one, I think those are other use cases compared to this one. And that's what I'm kind of wrestling with myself. I guess it's more testimony than questions, but you guys went to preservation board a couple times and there were no changes. So that's where I'm kind of struggling. There was no input or asking questions of how could we do better or, move forward with the demolition. What kind of hoops do we have to jump through to get through that? Or get to a point of concession on both sides. So that's what I'm struggling with personally. So
Can I just address that? Because we did bring it up both here and in the hearing. Our initial application, which was a pre-application review, if you will, to the Preservation Review Board, was turned down. They made some comments about the streetscape and the use on the first floor. It was almost 12 months later before we submitted for a formal vote under the normal application process for the demolition. No changes were made because the support of the neighborhood was contingent on the design of the building that we submitted the prior point. It wasn't a lack of response to the Preservation Review Board. It was because the community neighborhood process has encouraged us to stay the course. Again, we've offered to change and engage with anyone on the first floor parking, whether it's a green wall or it looks like one of our other projects with glass front. And we're still open to that, but nobody's taken us up on that offer to change it. So we haven't made any changes. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
yeah, I might have questions later. Sorry. That's all I have for now.
For
I
now,
guess.
okay.
Just a quick question for HM. I just wanted to understand, I think I've gotten through most of reading the transcript but if you could highlight, I guess, the experience of occupying or your tenant occupying the main commercial building. Just that I think I read a little bit about water issues and if you could just speak to like the conditions of the building for the tenant, since you guys have that experience.
Absolutely. So when we purchased the building, and I assume you're talking about 3148, which would have been the middle building of the 3. It had Homegrown Hair was the tenant, and the owner, Caitlin Tishka, is now a commercial tenant in 3201 Morgan Ford. So she was operating when we acquired the building and also residing in the upstairs apartment almost immediately from acquisition, we received notification where the roof was leaking. Had been an ongoing problem. There was interior damage that we ended up going in and repairing. Ultimately, Caitlin moved out of the upstairs apartment. The rear deck was, again, I'm not a licensed structural engineer, but in my opinion, it was structurally unsound after moving a refrigerator up and down and fearing for my life. We had ongoing issues with sort of the MEP, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC, primarily due to uses throughout history that have been added to that space. It was prior to Caitlin's tenure, it was a sandwich shop, and the sandwich shop closed for unknown reasons. But we were constantly with myself and my maintenance guys going over to fix various things that may or may not have been done by prior owners correctly. That's my take. And then as a result, due to ongoing operational issues and cost of HVAC replacement and water in the basement, Caitlin needed to expand, and we had been in development and building a building across the street that she's now moved into and helped grow her business within the district.
And did you attempt to find another tenant after?
No.
Okay. That's all my questions for now.
Commissioner Hubman?
No, so you never had any professional accredited engineers or whoever look at the buildings and determine that they had significant structural issues?
We have not.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Commissioner Jorgensen?
Can you talk a little bit about how you determine what kind of apartments to build there? What kind of interest do you have? I assume that you lean on some information that you have from your existing buildings and what market interest there is.
Absolutely. So we, just so everyone knows, we own our properties and typically self-manage through a AHM affiliated management company, of which I oversee most of the day-to-day on that. So we have very good data of who is coming to our existing buildings. 3172 Morgan Ford is presently about 97% occupied. We have 60% of the residents are from out-of-state phone numbers, or, they've moved here. And 3201 Morgan Ford is right around 90% occupied. We have 3 units available right now, and we have 54% of those residents are from out of state. Most of our tenancy and tenure of residents is typically higher than your average nationwide average, which is right around 22 months, and we're seeing about 28 months on average of our tenant occupancy tenure, as a result of a lot of professional folks moving to the neighborhood, but not necessarily wanting to put roots down via the acquisition or purchase of a home. And so they're gravitating towards these buildings for perhaps longer stays than maybe a typical renter. And I think a product of that is we have a makeup, a lot of medical residents, medical professionals, IT, and those types of folks.
Thank you. If we were to approve with conditions, and sounds like retail is an absolute no, that's not going to happen. But how about in terms of what the building looks like? Would it be financially feasible to make the exterior brick, for instance, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, fully brick, part of the reason we've made the choices we have is because of the cost of doing full masonry. We have other ground up proposed projects in other parts of the city. Use of incentives is necessary when you get into those. They're in historic districts where maybe those issues are required. So, the choice of limestone was to still use a natural material and pick up on other materials in the neighborhood, even if they're not a primary red brick material, which in many St. Louis neighborhoods, if not all, feels like that is the predominant aesthetic and material choice. But I'll go back to the first floor engagement at the pedestrian level. I think we have some flexibility because the choices there are not as impactful going up from a cost perspective, and what we already have there, cost choices between glass, metal, what have you, would be comparable along the way.
Thank you. I think I'll remind the commissioners and the folks who are speaking that remember this is a review of the record. So to the extent
think a little bit of this may be getting into new territory that was not under the Preservation Board's review.
But maybe it's presaging everything with conditions.
As this discussion goes on, just as a reminder.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. May I ask yes, thank you. About, you were talking about walkability.
Yes.
Can you define walkability for you and how the existing buildings are positive for walkability or pedestrian, and how the new project would not be?
Sure. In terms of walkability is how I believe it was portrayed at the last meeting. It's low scale buildings, 2-story, 1-story buildings that have commercial uses that do address the street in terms of front doors, front porches, things that have a welcoming sense when you walk down a historic streetscape that still conveys that original feel. So that's sense of walkability. The area was a mixed use area. So it was an area people can live and walk to various commercial uses and residential uses. So that existing streetscape has that sense of walkability.
Okay. Does it take into consideration at all the number of people who would be walking in the area, given that currently there are 3 empty buildings and with the new building, there'd be 40, 50 people walking from that building to local businesses?
I mean, is that a guardrail question? I'm sorry. He's asking me if having more people impacts my definition of walkability. I mean, again, I see what you're getting at. I understand what you're saying. More people would promote walkability. That's what you're getting at, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I guess it's a definition of how we're looking at the existing built environment versus the inclusion of a new building. So yes, people could equate to some level of walkability. Of course, that's an obvious thing, and that's an observation. I appreciate that. I think this is more in terms of that low scale, that 2-story, that neighborhood, historic, commercial, mixed use feel is the walkability that we're referring to.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, President, are you done?
Yes.
I want to use a little privilege to ask for, sorry. I want to use a little privilege to, while we've been doing some things on definitions. There was a mention by the applicant of using a word, a term a moment ago, before we went into this line of questioning, about a green wall. Would you add what a definition is of a green wall?
Sure. This is a wall that allows for vertical planting of plant material designed in such a way that watering and the growth of that root system would effectively be on a vertical plane and could be as tall as you want to make it. But in this case would be essentially the first floor. Again, part of that for us was to screen the parking. As you saw in our presentation, we've done that in a different way with glass storefront and lighting, and we're open to that. But green wall, more or less, for us is an active living wall with plants.
Commissioner German, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, just a follow-up with cultural resources. I think along the lines of Commissioner or temporary Commissioner Jorgensen's question. So my question is, the definition of walkability used by cultural resources in this analysis does not include people. The number of people that would be walking. It's more of can you just say one more time, like what the definition used now or used at the time of this ruling or the assessment was for cultural resources? Because I feel like we have different definitions.
And I think that's the issue, is there really is no defined term for walkability within an ordinance.
Okay.
It's our view of assessing the historic streetscape and viewing the merits of that. It's architecture, its overall presence on the block face in general and how it extends up and down Morgan Ford. And a part of that historic feel and, presence is walkability. I mean, it's small scale. Again, I know what you're saying. It's a number of people issue. Sure. People walk. I totally understand what you're getting at. I think it's more of the sense of walking in an area that maintains that historic feel, has that low scale, architecture has the corner commercial building, has the mid-block sandwich shop, has the one-story, the garage that's on that block. That sense of that kind of historic scale and how the pedestrian interacts with that historic architecture and those uses. So I think that's how I would view it without a formal definition of walkability.
More like replicability of the previous experience.
Sure, I could see that being, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah.
I may get called by the attorney on this. I'd like a follow-up as well. Maybe do you mean pedestrian scale?
Sure, I was going with what was said previously in the
Okay.
the presentations, but pedestrian scale is one way to do it as well. The inclusion of the larger building that doesn't have the interaction with the streetscape, the sidewalk, that's kind of the interruption that I think we're referring to.
And am I allowed to ask a question of this may not have been in the record, but how did? Well, I'm sorry, it's meant to be a follow-up to this discussion of pedestrian scale, and I think we're allowed to do follow-ups. I'm the chair. We're allowed to do follow-ups. I guess I'd like to hear from the developers how they see pedestrian scale in their proposal.
Yeah, I mean, walkability, pedestrian scale, I think we're well within the material we presented because a part of the support we received were from the businesses who talked about the need to create density to support commercial districts, especially neighborhood scale districts. And if you don't have commercial storefronts, the walkability of a commercial neighborhood district breaks down anyway. I mean, we see that in other neighborhoods within our city. So you can have the architecture, you can have the building, but if you have rows of vacant storefronts, constant turnover of retail and commercial activity, do you really have walkability? Walkability is the community, it's the density, it's the people involved, this interface of pedestrians and commerce and the mix of those uses along there. So that would be my definition. And I think the support we received from the business community spoke to the need to bring additional density, targeted density, which a commercial corridor seems right for that versus into the neighborhood directly. And so that's how we would view it and why we designed the project we did.
All right.
Can I add a follow-on comment?
Yes, sir.
Just out of consideration of precedent, I think that it's important for us to distinguish between the walkability of program and the walkability of design. Because I think one side is speaking to program, the other side is speaking to design. And if I understand correctly, cultural resources consideration is all based around design, not program. So while I agree with everything we've said about the walkability of the program, I don't think we want to set a precedent that one should compromise the other. I don't think it's a good precedent.
And I was meaning to ask about the architecture and how it maybe created more of the smaller scale pedestrian experience, but I'm gonna move on to our order. And Commissioner Miller, would you please ask a
I had a
question?
couple of questions. I want to go back to, you mentioned several times your other buildings on Morgan Ford. Did you go to cultural review on any of those?
No. Should I answer that? You can answer. Yeah. So they have two buildings on the street.
Right.
One is the MoFo, which is just to the south. The building on the site before was a 1980s car wash.
Okay.
So that was demolished, and then we reviewed demolition. So that had taken place a while ago, and then they proposed permits for MoFo, so we didn't see that. The other building is down the block, which was essentially an addition to a historic building. So there was not a demolition component on that. We did not review that project either.
All right. And there's some, Commissioner Bradley mentioned about variances on the other building. Did you have variances for height and parking on the other two buildings?
On those two buildings, yes.
Okay, what were the variances for?
We had zero setback height. I believe on 3201, there is also a maintenance agreement between the property to the south as well. And then I believe that was it.
That's all right.
Thank you. Williams. Any questions?
Trying to take in everything. Oh, really? Is it, am I the last one?
Turn.
Oh, geez. Okay, I don't know if I have questions, I guess more acknowledgement. So one, I just want to, share my appreciation of cultural resources for really being meticulous and upstanding like this standard of preservation. I think this is difficult. I think there's a lot of room for interpretation, which makes things get really squishy or sticky. So I just want to express my appreciation. Um, Along with that, I want to express my appreciation to AHM for what sounds like consideration of like community feedback. I do have a question. Where did the survey come from?
Sure. So the survey that was done was performed by the Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
So that went out to their prospective, I believe it was email and mailing list. And we did not control the responses of that.
So their letter of support was contingent upon survey results.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay. Um, so from the survey, it looks like the most resonant responses, or I'm going to focus on concerns, whether the respondent was in support or not of the development. The most resonant concerns appeared to be the fact that there was no retail, the fact that there did not appear to be enough parking, and the fact that this really would disrupt the neighborhood identity without defining how. I think that it appears you all did address the parking situation. And I really do appreciate that. Seems like there's still some misunderstanding of it amongst the community, which is also normal. I'm also hearing that it's nearly impossible to address the retail desire, right?
And maintain a 1-to-1 parking ratio. So
Can't do
given
both.
the size of the site
Yep.
and the need for us to have a lobby that meets ADA, elevator, and meet a 1-to-1 parking ratio, including ADA accessibility spaces, we have an inherent design space conflict between retail and parking spaces.
And
You add retail, we have to eliminate spaces. We can't make any more spaces if we add retail.
just, I guess for record what's the parking requirement by zoning? Is it 1-to-1?
That's our understanding. So
Gotcha.
that's what we're
Okay.
doing. But the neighborhood support was also
Also
predicated
passed.
on 1-to-1 in
Gotcha.
addition to the zoning.
Gotcha. Okay, just drew a blank. So I'm also wrestling with the neighborhood identity question. I appreciate the question about the brick. Yeah, I don't know if I have a complete thought or question there, just that I'm wrestling with the neighborhood identity, considering the fact that it was such a common concern from the participants in the survey, which is over a quarter of the people brought it up. And over half of the people who expressed concern, this was one of their concerns. A general question, I don't think maybe it's a rhetorical question. Is there an opportunity to address that? Like finding a way to bring back neighborhood identity in this development. As expressed by the respondents to the survey, which appear to be residents. That's it. So all my comments.
I'm sorry.
I think other people wanted to circle back around.
Oh. Alderman Cone, did you want us to circle back around to you for questions?
Sure, I have another question.
Oh, okay, we'll go with Commissioner.
So you mentioned before you didn't want to go through a design exercise, and I think we all understand trying to keep costs to a minimum. You've spent a lot of money probably on this. But the conversation with cultural resources in terms of working out a design solution that may accommodate, seems like you saved another building adjacent to one of your buildings before. Had you had any discussions about other configurations? I mean, it seems like, or is this it? Or were there any preliminary, when you were in the design process, where, hey, we looked at variations of this to try to accommodate especially since you're in a historic district?
Yeah, so the other building, which is 3201, we have a lot of properties in the 3000 block across the city, it feels like. 3201. So that historic building was situated very much on the corner. And so the balance of the lot had been vacant. There was a garage, which wasn't an original to that building at the time. So the ability to do a new and old integration on that particular site, the building orientation and sort of set of facts related to the lot size allowed us to do that, get parking underneath. I will say the new building has no commercial. The commercial space is in the first floor of the historic building on the corner for that building. So, which I think again speaks to one of the struggles of encouraging density in these districts on smaller footprints, that people want parking. They don't want it in the front yard. They don't want it in the side yard. Where do you got to put it? You got to put it under your building because you can't go behind the building. You've got an alley. And how do you begin to wrestle with these sort of community values, if you will, and still encourage development in accordance with, planning principles and what the community wants? And so those are the sort of conversations that we tried to have through the neighborhood process, including in our presentation. Design choices are clearly, an individual's choice, and not everybody likes a more contemporary approach to things. And so we tried to use materials relevant in the neighborhood in a more modern way. In this situation, for budget reasons, we're not seeking incentives, as well as still keeping the color tones and materials there. So I'll stop there because I don't want to venture. Counselor might shock me with.
Well, in that regard, and answer your question, I've asked the council and I may make a comment on this. We have spoken to the applicants after the meeting on design suggestions. So
To reiterate, first floor, because of the flexibility and the choices there, we're open to working that. It's the upper floors that become more challenging.
Ratio come down from the almighty? How firm are we on the 1-to-1? I mean, we're in a city, people do ride the bus, people do ride bikes. This is not for the whole entire world. How firm are we on 1-to-1? And I know you said that to the neighborhood, I get that. So, but I'm asking from our planning staff, our zoning staff, is that it?
I just know that if it wasn't on the record, it's not really part of your review. So to the extent that would be considered new testimony, that's not actually appropriate at this time.
So when we deliberate, we can only talk about what's in the record, not what we bring to the table to make a judgment.
You're entitled to bring your own knowledge to the table, of course, but this is
Okay.
a review of the record. So if you're asking for new facts, that was not part of the preservation board's consideration. You left the range of what you're allowed to have in front of you.
But we could speak to say that the record said that the 1-to-1 parking is required.
If it
and
was in the record, sure.
Yeah, and it was in the record that
yeah.
the neighborhood association wanted that.
Yeah, but I don't think the
It's
like
not
this,
required.
the zoning reference.
both.
But
example
it's
is
not been through zoning
right.
yet.
But if the zoning
is required.
reference is something that you know, then you're entitled to know that.
Let's see. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, did you want to ask any additional questions? No.
All right, no, I think my questions were still answered. I did have, I think hearing his response to Mr. Sterling, my question might have fell within that too, so
Okay.
I will, hold that.
Okay. All right, let's see. And I don't know that I have any additional questions. I think they were all fairly well answered by the previous commissioners. All right, with that, Marion, would you mind bringing back up our options? Discussion.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should have a motion on the table before we have discussion.
In the dis-
You guys.
Madam Chair, can I guess I do want this for clarity, just because I feel it might help with with my understanding first and foremost. Because the option to, uphold with conditions, if there is conditions that we feel might not have been answered or it might be able to be worked out, but we can't discuss what those conditions are, I'm not sure that that's really an option, right? If the conditions would be forthcoming, in the, what we're saying we can't talk about because they weren't deliberated in the hearing is what you're saying, right?
Oh, no, you are absolutely able to consider any conditions you wish. You're welcome to talk about your own.
Oh, we just couldn't talk about it with the speaker.
What I'm saying is you can't get more evidence from them because you're just reviewing the record. But if you, based on the record that you've seen, decide that there's an appropriate condition that you could use to modify the Preservation Board's decision, that is absolutely what you're welcome to do tonight.
And Marion, we have the 4 options back up, pretty clear.
So is it correct, David, then to arrive at conditions, they could at this time discuss a whole range of solutions,
Yes.
or options among conditions?
You have no limitation
commissioners.
on any condition that you may wish to place
But
as part of your
I
modification.
guess I'm just, unless I'm overthinking this, so you're saying that we could make conditions without having any kind of deliberation or conversation of the impact on the applicants, the neighborhood, the neighbors.
Yeah.
It would just be our conditions
My-
at that point.
I think a pathway to consider is if the commission, and David cut me off of
Yeah,
this,
I'm trying to follow.
but if the commission is interested in exploring kind of conditions in a general direction, you could direct staff to explore those with the appellant, and potentially with others. Is that true? And we could do that between this meeting and the April meeting and potentially come back with a couple of kind of defined scenarios, if that is the direction the commission would like us to explore.
So, Marion, David, on the board, on the screen, there are 3 things that could be done tonight. Uphold, overturn, or with discussion tonight, modify the board's decision. Or the 4th one is with some aspect of direction for modification, have it come back at the next meeting.
That's right. So if there was a modification that seemed clear that the commission was ready to act on tonight, that could occur tonight. But we understand the kind of universe of options may not be self-evident in terms of something that would also work for the appellant. So we could, with the direction of the commission and some kind of principles for the modifications, we could work on that between now and April.
Well, my question is, would the appellant even be interested in doing that? I mean, why for us to do that in a vacuum?
We can't do that. We can't get additional, that would be testimony.
Yeah, no, at this point, you can't get testimony from them, but it's something you don't have to make a decision. You don't have to make your decision tonight. You can consider your options and then direct staff to investigate and bring back an answer.
And that investigation could be, I think, would be with the appellant, because we couldn't make assumptions about what's workable or not.
Would it help to go through, and are we willing to make a statement about where we stand on this project as of now? That's unreasonable?
Can I ask a question first?
Yes.
So exploration of these added conditions, would that be considered added material to this consideration? Because we could only deliberate based on what,
I think the conditions need to come from the board, but with information that staff perhaps were to gather at your direction, that is determinative of whether the direction of the commission will be able to be followed, is potential option.
Is it relevant and appropriate to share that in the past where modifications have been explored, it's been through a process like we're describing, where there's a discussion and some intervening time between the presentations and a commission action?
Correct.
Part of your body's decision tonight is if you're seeing that there's an opportunity for modification, are there any that, from what you've heard in the interaction, that strike you as the primary ones? And if that's the case, then you may have another decision for us to do some tire kicking between the next meeting, but you also could go ahead.
I have another question about the scope of the decision today. Is our task before us to, like, the preservation board had to make make their ruling based on their scope? Is the planning commission allowed to make their decision based on their scope, or do we have to, say, hey, going by your rules, we either agree or disagree with your ruling? So are we, as a planning commission, allowed to bring other considerations? So for example, preservation board can't take into account the economic, the economic impact of the proposed development, but can we, as a planning commission, as part of our either overturning of their decision or upholding it?
Legislation is silent as far as clearly directing whether you have a limitation. It just says that the planning commission shall in writing affirm, reverse, or modify the decision of the preservation board, period.
Okay. Well, intuitively, my just reaction to that is, what's the point of being able to go to another body if they're not allowed to bring their thoughts and experience to the question? Otherwise, you could just ping pong back and forth to the preservation board in perpetuity. So, if the rules, if the, law is silent, I would say let's bring the planning commission's perspective to the issue.
So with that, just the way you structured that, when you say bring to this, you don't necessarily mean the applicant. You mean you're a body of different individuals that are selected to be on the planning commission for the planning commission's purview. And from that perspective, you may have some things that you'd like to be thinking in your mind and contribute to this. That is a yes. You're a different body with different levels is not the right word. Some different,
Responsibilities.
responsibilities and talents. And you're now with those as part of your makeup and your decision-making are making a potentially we're making a new decision or ratifying a decision.
And I guess I want to say, with that in mind, I guess I'm going to make my own testimony as our group goes. On condition C, it says if the structure or portion thereof proposed to be demolished is obviously not sound, the application for demolition shall be approved except in shall be approved. Oh, shoot. I misread that the first time. But my second point was, we refer to this as an eclectic neighborhood, and there are now two buildings that are, in my mind, somewhat similar to this one. So it is now part of the fabric of this neighborhood to have structures like this. This is 1 story taller. That's kind of the one piece that I'm concerned about. but is at least the projects that were done by these developers. So is this neighborhood evolving? And I think the other thing I felt was compelling was the reference to the sloop by one of the callers in the record, that this project would be encouraged, I would say, under the new sloop. Shall we go through individually? Just start at the top?
Sure.
Alderman Cohn, would you like to give us a summary of your thinking or questions? Alderman Cohn, we can come back to you. Alderman Clark Hubbard, anything now in terms of your point of view and how you'd like to proceed?
No, not this time.
This time? Let's see. Commissioner Bradley.
Thank you. So, I mean, generally, I don't have any issues with most of this. I know you all have different thoughts on different things, but my concern is pretty basic, that we should require them to have their variances, their plans and their permits in place before we issue a demolition permit. Because what we don't need is another blank lot in the city because they weren't able to get something else. So if you don't get all the boxes checked before, we don't issue the permit. The buildings are there for whenever. That's my concern.
Got it. Commissioner Fowler.
Good job. Good. My journal thing is I think we should, through everything, I think we should have maybe worked a little harder before we got to this point as a collective to try to get to a middle ground. Oh, sorry. I wish that we had worked together a little bit harder before we got to this point. I came in this meeting with one set of ideas and I find myself in the middle. So I just, maybe if we get to the point where there's conditions, I'll have some recommendations, but at this point, no questions really, no comments. It's tough.
Yeah, so,
Did you bypass Paul?
no,
FH.
I'm going through my list.
Okay, great.
Yep. Commissioner Garmendia.
Kind of where I stand right now is, I'm interested in overturning the decision. I think I would agree with some of the comments made by the chairwoman on just the new neighborhood context. I think there was sufficient neighborhood there. Of course, there is neighbors that want the blocks to remain the same, but there is a lot of community support for the new development, which I think should be a definitely requirement if you're going to turn a preservation board decision. So I think it definitely is like, I look at those buildings and yes, it would be nice if they were viable to be maintained. I think the applicant made a good faith effort to occupy those. So I think ultimately when we're looking at the limitations that the preservation board had when making their decision, they couldn't take into account the future impact of a new development. And I do think adding that level of density of residential will make that district stronger and make the there'll be more people to protect and use the other buildings. So I do think I think approving this doesn't mean like we will railroad over all of the cultural resources and preservation board's decisions to maintain other buildings. But I think in this case, we're balancing like, well, we think this development will add more than what's there. So, so that's where I stand on it. And I think as a planning commission, we can bring more to the table than just what the preservation board had to look at. There was even dissent within the preservation board. It wasn't like it was a 5-0. It was a 3-2. And so I think there was, is one person would have, if they had voted otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So I think it's fair that we're gonna have mixed feelings on this topic, and I kind of land on the side of moving forward with the development and approving the demolition.
Sorry, Chair Boaz, should have clarified, I'm in the uphold preservation. Sorry.
I heard you that way. I
Okay.
heard you that way. Okay, Commissioner Hubman.
So I think this is a good developer. I think they've been a good steward of their area. They're invested in the district. However, it's a historic district and they want to tear down 3 contributing buildings. I think the fact that they're empty now is largely a factor of them owning them for this past several years. So I have to mitigate that argument in my head. I also think from the pedestrianism, the walkability standpoint, there's a cumulative impact as well as to the historic district to yet another large contemporary structure. And I like contemporary urban infill, but I think the impact on the historic district, the nature of it with the MoFo, the 7-Eleven and this, it's just, it creates kind of a dominant impact on the neighborhood. And the walkability also, it's half a block of a dead storefront. That's not, in my mind, good for walkability. I think we have to reach a high bar to overturn the decision of another city entity, and I don't think we're there. So I'm in the I'm in the uphold the denial at this point.
Can I ask for a point of clarification on that? What percentage of the block front is this project? Half sounded like more than.
Oh, you're right.
I thought it was 20%.
It's 3 contiguous properties adjacent to 2 other.
It's probably a little less than quarter of the block, maybe a little about a
Okay.
quarter-ish of the block.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, Commissioner Jorgensen.
I think the headline for me is that this would add 40 to 50 residents to the area. That's major in several ways. It would activate the neighborhood. It would bring more people to local businesses. It would bring a lot of tax revenue to the city, to the schools. That really matters, makes a big difference. We have a housing crisis in this country and in the city. We just need more of it. So I don't believe that making this difficult or impossible to do is in the interest of the city, the people who could live here, the schools. It matters a lot to me that there are letters of support from the alderwoman representing the ward, from the neighborhood association, and from several businesses. I think it matters. We should think about the preservation of not just these buildings, but the entire neighborhood and the entire city. And I think that preserving the city, bringing the city back on a positive path in terms of population is about preservation in a way that matters more than preserving these 3 buildings. I am originally from Denmark. In Denmark, a building that's 130 years old is not considered an old building. If you've been to cities like Copenhagen, you'll see that we have a lot of much older buildings, but we also have contemporary buildings. And it really makes for, I mean, if you've been to Copenhagen, it's one of the best cities in the world. And that's part of the reason for that. I don't believe in, I like historic buildings a lot, but I don't believe in preserving historic buildings just because of their age or just because they're in a district with other historic buildings. These 3 buildings, I don't think are among the more beautiful or more interesting buildings in the neighborhood. So I'm very much in favor of overturning the decision.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller.
I'm leaning on the side of upholding the Preservation Board's ruling. There's a lot of places in the city that would love to have these buildings. I know a few in my neighborhood we'd love to have. But it's all about, to me, location and the fact that the area is growing is partially, it's a historic district where people are preserving the fabric of the historic property. I do think there's something to be gained by having some further discussions on it. I think there's a path that if we work on it with staff, that we could come to a path where we can reach some agreement. I understand the developers, the limit on cost. That's a big item, but some of the things on the streetscape, parking, I think those things can be discussed, knowing there is a budget and it's in the real world. You know, the budget's probably already gone up substantially since 23. We're in 25, so, but I mean, I'm willing to talk about that and to see if we could reach some accommodation, because we are giving up something, and we're giving it up for something specific. And that specific thing needs to be of quality that is worth giving up fabric. It's not either, we're not just giving it up for nothing, but is this of the quality in the neighborhood that offsets that? So that's my thought.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams.
Oh, okay. I think right now I lean toward overturning the preservation board's decision. My reasons are, first, I agree with Chairwoman that the historic nature of this district is the diversity in the building type. And in order to preserve that historic nature, you must continue to contribute to the diversity of the building type. I think that pushes and pulls, to get to another commissioner's comment, that at some point, these contemporary buildings, if they all look the same, start to overtake the diversity of the district. But we must consider that the historic nature, as written in the registry application, I read it all 350 pages, was the diversity of the district, which means it didn't necessarily attribute a lot of it to like the specific designs of any one particular building. It was all about how it was this mix of things. I also agree with Commissioner Jorgensen that in order to preserve this district, you have to continue to breathe life into it. More specifically, in order to preserve the other historic buildings on Morganford, which appear to be retail, they need tenants, or they need customers, I'm sorry. And by densifying that corridor with more tenants, we are indirectly giving them more customers, which allows the building to remain occupied and maintained and preserved. So I see some benefit there, and it seems like a reasonable trade-off to trade some vacant buildings, one of which for quite some time, for more density to preserve the other buildings in the district. So that's why I lean toward overturning the preservation board's decision right now.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your point of view. I think at this point, we just need a motion on the table to see if we can come to a consensus. And right now, I think I don't know which way it's going to go, because we're fairly evenly divided, particularly with two people not making comments.
Oh, can I?
Oh, yes.
I also think there's an opportunity for conditions too. So I forgot to say that. So just for the record, and I agree with a lot of the conditions that Commissioner Bradley expressed.
Okay. Alderman Cohen, did you want to take this opportunity to say where you're standing on this?
I believe I'm in alignment here with Commissioner Bradley and some of the other folks on the commission as well. You know, I have always been a supporter of our historic preservation, but I also think that, you know, the project itself, you know, has merit, and is certainly something that is, if there's support from the neighborhood and support from the older people, you know, that I, you know, would like to, you know, I don't always, but I would like to try and, you know, support their recommendations as well. But I do want to make sure that we, you know, have conditions on there that are going to ensure that, you know, the processes in terms of the parcels, all of that would be, you know, taken place before demolition permits are allowed or pulled. So that we, aren't just demolishing these buildings for the sake of progress without actually having skin in the game, so to speak. So I really feel very strongly that if we do approve this, that we need to have conditions. But otherwise, if there are no conditions on it, then I would be a no. But I think if we have the proper conditions on it, that, I would be more supportive.
Thank you. Does anyone want to make a motion?
Madam Chairman, may I make an observation?
Yes, you may.
The asking for the planning commission review of a preservation board decision does have two steps. This is our second step. So the first step you took, you said, yeah, give us the whole record and come here, as opposed to, we don't want to hear anything more. Just go to court if you'd like to go to court. So just remind you, as you think about it having been here and come here, and you've seen this record, are there thoughts in your mind that help you with the choices of options?
You're asking us all to think about that, or?
You have been talking about it.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
we have.
yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I'd like to make the motion that we continue to April. And the reason I say that is there's been a lot of different thoughts tonight on conditions, working with the developer, asking questions. So if we did that, we could ask staff to consider some of the things they've heard, talk with the developer, and see what could possibly accommodate some of these things to come back in a proposal form at the April meeting, where if we start talking about it tonight, I think with a long agenda, we're gonna be here for another 3 hours. So it would give us a chance to, allow them to help us formulate some of these things into a decision, and then we could vote on it reasonably. So I'd like to make the motion, we continue in April.
Second. Motion been made and seconded.
Sorry.
Who, for the record, we want to hear.
Yeah, I didn't hear who.
Who made the second?
Commissioner Miller.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, just for staff, would you mind restating the motion? I just want to make sure that.
So we're continuing April, but my commentary is you as staff have heard a lot of conditions and things that we're talking about that we think are important to possibly approving this. I heard a number of people say different things. And so
explore the
the
spirit
developer has
of-
also heard these, and we would ask you as staff to speak with them and see if there are any of those things that they could come back in April and say, we can definitely do that, or we could definitely do that. And then we could formulate a decision from there.
Thank you.
Are we discussing
And that-
motion? Are we voting on this? We have to vote.
We can have discussion at this point. So as part of that discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I was asking for, so the only condition that I heard, unless I missed something, specific condition was the one that Commissioner Bradley made about the variances and everything being in order before the permits were issued. So would there be opposition to moving forward with that, or did someone else have another specific condition that they were looking for? Because if not, I'm wondering why we can't overturn with that condition to keep it moving forward.
I would have additional things that I would like planning staff to talk about. Can I make that? Can I add those things
Part of
now?
discussion. Well, I think you can. Well, let's
Or
see.
was that
I
the
think
only?
let's have discussion. So you can either, you
talk
can have a
about
motion to modify, or you can, or simply
Just
discuss.
express them.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, there's an additional condition, so I guess I would make a motion to modify.
So the motion was to push to April,
Yeah, that's
and then we're just
what we're
having.
talking about.
So I believe the motion that's on the table though currently, that's a motion and a second, is to vote on this on April 2nd or on the April board meeting or commission meeting. So that's the motion before us right now. the Alderwoman from the 10th just, made a suggestion. That doesn't modify the motion at all, where the motion is still pending before us about continuing the conversation and then voting on it in April.
So I'm
Would
very,
it help if
Oh.
I restated kind of the themes of the exploration that I heard in discussion and to see if that syncs up with your, okay, so I heard including the appellant's openness to this, exploring kind of treatments of the Morgan Ford facing ground floor wall, or kind of how that building meets the street and what the materials and so on involves. I heard at least an exploration of kind of the parking conversation, understanding that that would involve a significant departure from what the neighborhood supported and would introduce the need for an additional variance. Are there other themes you're interested?
Yeah, so I would like to add this because we weren't able to talk about conditions. So exploring the change in building height is something I would like to explore. Looking at, just to expand on this a little bit, looking at the design we saw, if you reduce by 1 story, that's 12 units, which reduces 12 parking spaces. Sorry, I ran out of breath there. So that would allow for either retail or something else to change on the first floor. And I think from a lot of the feedback from residents in the area, they asked for that retail. So I think that's something I would like to, maybe they can look at their pro forma, et cetera, to see if that is viable.
so what Noreen is asking, is to make a motion to go to April with a couple things that have come up as the discussion points. Going to take that as guidance. I think what Miriam is asking, is there any more guidance you want to give us during that time?
Right. And I think we're getting there.
If I may, I would just say that I can understand Commissioner Bradley's motion and specifically the concern about variances, but I disagree with changing other conditions because this project is what the community has seen. This is what the Alderwoman of the ward is in favor of. This is what the community is in favor of. This is what the business community is in favor of. I think altering the height, I assume, would impact how likely this project is to move forward at all. So what I would like to do, though I can understand this motion, would be instead to just modify the decision on the condition that the variances are approved first.
So at this stage, do we need to vote on the current motion?
Yeah, you do need to vote, and yeah, we do need to vote on the current motion unless he rescinds it. I plan to vote no for the reason that we want to go ahead and.
And but do we need to complete that list of things that would be investigated before we vote on it?
I think we're getting a little fuzzy as to what the current motion is.
Well, the current motion is to
push to
move
April.
Yeah, move to April and that we investigate ground floor, how it meets the street and materials, the parking and the height.
That's in the motion. Yes.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say in,
Let me just make sure. That is what people believe is on the motion that's been first and second.
That's what I.
Wait.
is on the motion.
no, I don't think so.
Oh, you don't think so?
The conditions are not in the motion.
Right, I was gonna say, I didn't.
The
believe
motion
it
is to
was
push to April, and then through discussion, we're suggesting things that
Fair enough.
staff could
Yeah.
explore with the appellant.
So, yeah, I
I'm not
think
sure how we would pass that motion without anything defined.
what, okay.
So, Rich, is that true? Your motion did not have any conditions?
So my motion simply was to move to April. Then I was talking additional commentary of why to move to April for different conditions that people brought up. I mean, the conditions that I mentioned are pretty cut and dry, and I don't know that too many people would argue that, but I heard others talking about other things that they're concerned with, so I thought there was an opportunity, maybe the staff could visit with the developer and ask some of these questions, so as you're voting, you would understand what those are, but, that's a sidebar discussion. I'm moving that we continue to April, period.
So
We want some guidance.
how about, would this work? Maybe if staff could draft their understanding of the conditions that, or the concerns that we have, and then put that back to us, say tomorrow or the next day. And then we could either say yes or no, and then that could become sort of the guidance for what we're asking to look for. And that, then it's written down, we've had a
I
chance to
think you're
review
talking
it.
about reconvening at that point.
Then we would have to reconvene.
But what we want to see in April, I guess, is a response to some of the conditions or concerns that we're asking for. And this would allow them to prepare.
Which we cannot do unless we reconvene.
Yeah, okay.
So we need to either make the list.
Want you to ask, yeah.
Yeah,
We need to make the list if we want to move forward this motion, modify the motion to include the list.
okay,
And then we can vote on it to decide if that's how we want to move forward.
got it.
So right now we have that we would be amending this motion or modifying this motion to include investigation of ground floor, how it meets the street and the materials, parking and height. Is there anything else that someone wants to add to that list before we formally modify the motion
Any of
and
the
vote on it?
variances, the plans and the permits.
The variances, yes.
Variances.
It seems, it seems if they could clarify the walkability issue, it's at some level, it seems to
How
be.
does one clarify walkability?
There seems to be a swirl of, I don't know what they mean by it, how they're addressing it. But
Can I please say something?
No, I'm sorry. This is not a public meeting. Thank you, though. You can communicate with Miriam Keller and she can handle any questions that you have.
Project, and that is not the case. That is not the case.
So,
She'll have to leave if she wants to talk. We'll have to show her.
Did you
So
hear
I-
that, ma'am?
So as part of our discussion, I do think that we are simplifying community feedback. Especially if we're looking at this survey, what I see is equal concern and approval, because if 62 people were in favor, 64 people had concerns, even if they were in favor. So one of the things I would like to see exploration of is like just acute consideration of the concerns in the survey.
Can you help point us to where that is in?
There's a pie chart.
At the very end, there's like a, it's like the last 10 pages or something.
Which is at the very back of the packet. For the sideline. The survey begins on page 173 of the packet for the side.
Go to the last page of the survey. Or no, not the last
Right.
page, second page.
Yeah, that's right. It was after.
That's not.
So I think Commissioner Williams was talking about page 175 that summarizes kind of in gross numbers, who supports and who, or how many people
Yeah,
that
well,
responded to the survey.
Right, I'm saying that when we take out support or not support, it's really about conditions or no conditions, or in place of conditions, I was saying concern or no concern. The way that shakes out is 62 had no concerns, 64 had concerns. And with that being said, I'm just saying that's no votes.
Yes, votes for 62.
And then you have yes with conditions, which means they had concerns. So you add 40 to 24, that's the 64 I'm talking about.
But it was my understanding that the concerns were what were met.
Yes, with conditions, yeah. Oh, sorry. Bit of the meat. So at this point, we do need to vote on the motion that we need to modify the motion to include those points. And you also wanted to
Just-
add,
Just like some deeper consideration of all the concerns that were expressed in the survey. And if they were met, then I think that will be revealed after staff explores those.
can you restate that list?
So what I heard is, so the street presence of the building, how the building meets the street, with special attention to the treatment of that Morgan Ford Road facing wall. Height and its relationship to parking and the potential for retail space. sounds like a sort of baseline concern about a contingency of kind of having a building permit in place before a demolition permit is granted. And
I think that was about zoning.
Permits and variances.
that's right. So yeah, that's in a separate category, but what I heard summarized you would like us to explore with the appellant is how the building meets the street in terms of that Morgan Ford Road facing kind of wall height and its relationship to the amount of parking that's required and the potential for retail space within the development, which also relates to height and the amount of parking that is required.
Do you accept that modification?
I do.
I did that properly, David?
In your feedback to the commissions, you talked about exclusively about uses of the first floor or design of the first floor facade.
I heard those as two separate issues raised that there's interest in exploration
Now, I guess I
and
heard-
directly with the appellant rather than in a. Is that correct?
I heard.
I hate to do this.
Okay.
Can I just further specify?
And thought to
Can I? Let me maybe restate my condition condition of exploration. This survey discloses specific concerns from the respondents, who all appear to be community members. It is then summarized as conditions. And we are assuming that those conditions are what the neighborhood association listed in their letter. But that doesn't appear to be the case once you get into them. So I'm asking staff to consider all the concerns that were expressed and try to assess them and provide a response to them.
Alongside the three that I just listed based on
Correct.
commissioner discussion.
Correct.
Okay.
So how many concerns?
There are 1, 2,
7, 8 of them, they're in there. I don't know. Some of them, I think some of them, the response is easy, right? It's just, not feasible. But some of them, may require a more detailed response.
And then back on the question of first floor uses, I did think Commissioner Fowler's concern about the height was to allow reduction in parking and therefore allow retail.
It's gonna cascade. Yes.
That we should explore that. The retail space would have its own parking requirements, but I mean, we would explore that fully as well.
Right, you accept those modifications?
I do.
Don't need-
So just so the record's clear, so Rich made a motion. Is he withdrawing it and restating it as modified, or are we gonna have a vote to modify the motion and then a vote?
Which would you prefer?
Rich able to withdraw and then restate the whole thing?
I know, there's a lot.
Miriam will assist you as.
Okay, can I?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So I'd like to modify my motion. The motion is to continue until April so that staff has the opportunity to
Explore with the appellant potential modifications, including height, how the building meets the street on Morgan Ford, including material and use, exploring the potential for ground floor retail, and to study and explore the issues and concerns articulated in the survey responses.
And you.
Second.
Yes, that's my motion.
All right.
Just say one thing, exploring potential is always a true thing.
I mean, it's.
And where does the community involved?
So, roll call vote?
Yes. Second thing though, I want to go back, is you made mention about the zoning.
You did mention variances in zoning.
So, Rich, when you first started, you wanted those zoning approvals to occur.
That was for the conditional approval.
Well,
We
this
could,
is a conditional approval.
but we could address that in the motion in April.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're really just-
What I'm saying is,
So here.
those will not occur likely between. now
True,
and
so that could be, assuming the rest of these things pass muster and the approval, that's a normal condition for getting this done to assure that they don't fail at one of these things and we wind up with a demolition permit and a blank lot. That's what I'm trying to avoid.
And for other commissioners, it is a consistent practice of the Preservation Board in cases where they issue or kind of allow a demolition to place a condition on that demolition approval requiring a building permit before the demolition permit could be granted. So I think that's what you're referring to.
Other little head flap I'm going to ask, is by the research the staff is going to do, with the applicant, there's a potential that by asking some of our questions, we'll get new information. That'll get by what they're asking us.
If it's new information, it's not part of the record on review.
Exactly.
It is not something that should be
Exactly.
presented.
But it's part of this modification that we're doing.
If we start with proposed modification, then it can be proposed, but it's not facts that are being provided for your consideration as you decide.
We're evaluating the task we're being given. In that evaluation, we might have to have some check marks and understanding of things. Right. That may lead us to some new contextual aspects.
If I may, from how I hear what Mr. Meyer just said, it sounds like we would be having, this would be the same meeting, but in April, there'll be new testimonies, what we're asking for. We would not be able to use that. Therefore, I do not think that this motion makes sense.
It's not going to be new testimony. Staff is engaging. We have to help work on these items. We may hear some things that in that current to help us.
Would it not be new testimony if AHM were to say, yes, we can do 3 floors, or no, we can't? That's not something that's in the.
So the
Can
blue
we-
text up there under continue the items to April. Really. Not a lot.
Is it fair to say that we'll work together as a team to figure out how to appropriately present the potential modifications that result from our exploration to make sure that we stay within the boundaries of the procedure here? Is that?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, again, there won't be any new testimony. There will not be information being provided by any of the, so to speak, parties before you.
Yeah.
But staff will be able to do its exploration and provide potential conditions for your consideration.
We're giving an assignment. If we end up asking a question, get new information, that's going to be part of assignment.
I'm just a little concerned that the decision we're overturning is based on what was presented to the Preservation Board, not like in negotiations with the Planning Commission, like a different design. So I feel like we should keep it simple. It's like, do we, based on what they presented, what they want to do, what they told us they want to do, no changes, do we approve or the demolition, do we overturn their decision, or do we uphold the decision that Preservation Board made?
And the community as well.
I think we need to
And the
vote on this motion and then we can, based on the outcome, we can potentially.
I think the simple thing is, you want with conditions, we're not going to get them cooked up tonight. They'll be at the next meeting.
But I don't know that we all agree with, that's what we want. So that's what voting will,
We're asking them to explore them.
but we may not be depending on how the vote goes.
Oh, true.
Yes, right. So as currently crafted, could we take a roll call vote on?
Let's call the question.
Call the question, as he said.
We ready?
Roll call.
Okay. Alderman Cone? Alderwoman Clark Hubbard?
No.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Fowler,
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia,
No.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
No.
Commissioner Hubman,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Boaz,
No.
Alderman Cone,
Pass.
Back to you. Pass, yes, phone again.
What's our result?
he said pass.
What is pass? Pass, you mean abstain? Or is pass a thing?
You have to go back to him, yes. we got-
Yeah, abstain. Thank you.
Where are we?
Okay, and the motion passes with 5 voting aye and 4 nays and 1 abstention.
To that end, we need to make sure, as we transcribe this, what that motion is.
I will
So the folks that-
restate the motion and anybody object. The motion is to continue to April with the expectation that staff will bring back options for modifications that we'll have worked on with the appellant. And the issues we'll explore in developing those options include how the building meets the street at the ground level, including both the use of the space and the material treatment of that part of the facade, height, and the potential for ground floor retail, as well as exploring the issues described in the survey results raised by the respondents.
And variances, right?
I think
Variance was a condition.
Okay.
that's something we may integrate into the options that we'll present in April.
Bit of a kitchen sink.
It is.
It feels sticky.
Okay. Completed that. Aye. Next, the zoning code overhaul review. Oh, excuse me, no, update on neighborhood planning on Project Connect Neighborhoods.
Well, good evening, Chair, and good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I am Jonathan Roper, the City Planning Executive for Neighborhood Planning for the City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency. Tonight, we're going to hear about a longstanding kind of development in the works. 25 years ago, this very Planning Commission passed a plan for the neighborhoods of the Fifth Ward and the JVL plan. A plan that included portions of the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood, St. Louis Place, Carr Square, Columbus Square, Old North St. Louis, and Hyde Park. And that was to guide decisions around bringing and improving quality of life, housing, economic development. Highly supported by the community. That plan also focused on the infamous site, the Pruitt-Igoe site that many of you might have seen implode in the 70s. So in 2016, that site became fresh again when the NGA announced their relocation from Second Street in South St. Louis to the corner of Cass Avenue at Jefferson. The improvements there would also spur or have the potential to spur a lot of new development, increasing the quality of life and a lot of different changes. So from 25 years ago to today, we now have formed as a city, Project Connect, the entity that is trying to leverage all the improvement, development, and coordinating that around this NGA, including the neighborhood planning as well. So we have initiated the R-Plan planning process, and we're going to introduce tonight our neighborhood transformation managers who work for the St. Louis Development Corporation, Melissa Garcia and Curtis Griggs. They, along with a team, Interborough Partners and KSG, have been working on the R-Plan initiative of Project Connect. So tonight we're going to hear a presentation. I invite Curtis and Melissa up to kick off that presentation along with our Interborough team, who you'll hear online. And this is just the introduction to Project Connect, where in the future, we will also ask for a public hearing or ask permission to hold a public hearing, and to, seek plan adoption. With that, introduce Curtis Griggs.
Hello, everyone. I am Curtis Griggs. I am the neighborhood manager, or one of the neighborhood managers for Project Connect and the project manager for the Our Plan initiative. So we'll go over a brief presentation of updates of where we are with Our Plan and Project Connect. There is a slideshow. I don't know if I need to give that to somebody. Different. I mean, I can.
Good thing I had Rasmus to represent us. I said, good thing I had you to represent us.
My cup's empty.
All right, there we go. So this is an update to the Project Connect Our Plan initiative. And you can go to the next slide. Next slide, there you go. So Project Connect is spearheaded by SLDC. The project ensures coordination and collaboration between neighborhood revitalization, transportation infrastructure improvements, and other redevelopment efforts. And the city of St. Louis's investment and support of NGA West Campus. Project Connect basically works by creating alignment between the people of the neighborhood's existing plans, current and future projects by both public and private sectors. The 6 neighborhoods that make up Project Connect are Hyde Park, Jeff Vanderloo, St. Louis Place, Old North St. Louis, Carr Square, and Columbus Square. And next slide. Some of the goals of Project Connect are 1, to attract investment opportunities and leverage community assets to transform the 6 neighborhoods surrounding the new NGA West facility, to conduct community outreach to align their aspirations with actionable data-driven objectives derived from local and regional agencies to inform development opportunities and to support existing residents and encourage compatible new developments by optimizing the impact of public and private investments, sustainability efforts, and infrastructure projects. Next slide. Another one of the major goals that we're going to be talking about, of course, is the Our Plan initiative. Briefly, I'll talk about this now because they are going to give a deeper in-depth of Our Plan. But the goal of the Our Plan initiative is to develop community-driven neighborhood plans for the 6 neighborhoods that surround NGA. Each of these neighborhood, or each of the 6 neighborhoods will drive their individualized plan through neighborhood planning committees that will work with SLDC, PDA, and our consulting team, Interborough and KSG, to reach plan adoption. The adopted plans will guide and influence decision-making for resources and investments that are needed for the neighborhood or for neighborhood growth and sustainability. Some of the actionable items that have happened in the history of Project Connect are 1, the hiring of Project Connect managers, myself and Melissa Garcia, as well as a slew of other people, the creation of the Strategic Resource Committee, which we are in the process of restarting, the NGA Special Use District, tax relief for the JVL neighborhood and St. Louis Place neighborhood, the redevelopment or development review committee. Some of the infrastructure improvements are I-64 or improvements to I-64, 40 Jefferson, Cass Avenue, and 20th Street. We also have, since we've restarted the Our Plan initiative, neighborhood plan updates, and Project Connect is one of the development demonstration areas. Next slide. So this is the team that is working together for the Our Plan initiative. Of course, in the top corner, you see the city that is St. Louis Development Corporation. The PDA, the Planning and Urban Design Agency, a Strategic Resource Committee. And then we have our consultant teams that were hired, which are Interborough Partners and Key Strategic Group, and they are also working with Code Studio. So I think at this time now, I'll let Dan take over, who is the head of the Interborough Partners.
Thanks, Curtis. Good to see you all. Sorry, I'm not there in person. But yeah, we've had the unique pleasure of working on this project, and we've got a great team. It's great to work with SLDC as well as PDA. And so what you see here are some of the goals of our plan, which is under the umbrella of Project Connect. Just as Curtis said, we inherited, I would say, a project that was maybe 30–40% done. And that had started in December 21. And I'll show a timeline in a minute to get a better sense of that. I think a lot of this repeats what Curtis just said. Thank you. So here are the goals. So to guide proactive and reactive land use policies and programs, and guide the implementation of growth opportunities and investments, to empower the community to drive development and the vision they want to see by being active participants in neighborhood economic growth, and to demonstrate neighborhood transformation in action as aligned with the SLDC Economic Justice Action Plan and other city goals. Next slide. Yeah, so again, this goes all the way back to 2021. A bunch of work was done, a decent amount of engagement, the drafting of some visions and some objectives and goals and things. That was paused in July 2023. About a year later, we picked up the project. And so we inherited a good amount of information from the previous consultant, but there's still a lot of work to do, and there still is. Next slide. So this is a timeline for when we picked up in right around fall of 2024. Big picture here. So you see you see where we are. A couple months into the process, it has a somewhat accelerated timeline, just owing to the fact that we did inherit quite a lot of work. The important thing to point out here is this 100% draft. We're aiming to really have a 100% draft at the end of April, and we're going to be targeting a June adoption date if all goes well. And there's quite a lot of time built in there, obviously for y'all to review, but also for the NPCs to review, for the clients to review. But you see, we've done quite a lot of work, quite a lot of engagement, just about through our existing conditions. And go to the next slide. Next slide. So on the engagement front, see here some pictures of our various events. Had a fairly robust engagement effort thus far. Next slide. And so we've got NPC meetings. So that's maybe the planning committees. They've been great. There's a committee for each of the 6 neighborhoods. Even though this is we're looking at this as an area, we're also looking at this as independent neighborhoods. So each of them has their own an NPC. Had quite a few public open houses, a number of pop-ups, a lot of neighborhood meetings. Talk to anyone who would talk to us on the city side and inside the city, which has been great. Talk to a lot of developers and major stakeholders. We're out there canvassing every weekend to try to get the word out, make sure no one's falling through the cracks. Want to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. And online social media and youth events. You can see some picture of that in the next slide. Actually, just before that, this is just establishing what the NPC roles are versus the roles of the community. I think some of this will be familiar to you. Next slide. We've got a website. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. ProjectConnect.fpl.com. Next slide. We've got an Instagram. We don't have quite as many followers as we've got for the Sloop, but it's got a pretty robust conversation going there. And in case, we've got a Facebook page as well. Next. We've been doing newsletters just to keep everybody in the loop. Next slide. And here's where you can learn more if you want to and you want to stay updated with the project. Next slide. Just gonna give a couple planning updates. As I mentioned, we're just about through our existing conditions analysis. We're looking at the city as a whole and how the Project Connect area fits inside of that city. How the area fits inside of St. Louis. We're looking at the Project Connect area, those 6 neighborhoods. Then we're looking at each neighborhood independently. Next slide. So we're also reviewing existing plans and investments, and just tracking all the different investments that have been made, obviously reviewing any kind of plan that has anything to do with this area. Next. I think from existing conditions, vacancy is obviously a huge topic. We're looking at not only what's vacant, but who owns what's vacant. So obviously a big part of this is the eminent domain space, or a huge big implications for the neighborhood. We're also looking at the strategic planning plan. We did have an opportunity before we adopted the SLOOP to have some meetings with the neighborhood just to make sure we were on the right track and optimize this the SLOOP for the plans. That said, it's an evolving plan. Things have happened, and we might have some additional changes to make to the SLOOP. Next slide. Okay. Community engagement. I mean, basically, we did a lot of kind of general overview. What do folks want to see? What matters to folks? One of the things we wanted to do is test the different objectives that we inherited, make sure that we were on that people still believed in them. Obviously, we're doing our own vetting at the same time. A lot has changed since the project was stalled. Next slide. So here you see just some pictures of the engagement in action. Next slide. Obviously, it's really critical for us, this being a plan that is going to have be hopefully adopted by y'all. Want to make sure we met the requirements, and so we want to make sure we have solid recommendations for all of these different planning topics. So one of the things that we did was we just basically presented some of the objectives we had and highlighted where there were some, blind spots. And so invited the community to sort of think about new objectives that would ensure that we're representing all of these important categories. Next slide. So this is just at a very high level. At a very high level, this is what basically what have emerged as some priorities for the different neighborhoods. I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you have more questions, we can talk about it in the Q&A. Next slide. So what you're seeing here is just a list of all the objectives. These are kind of materials that we prepared for the NPCs. We took all of the objectives that have been identified. We put them on a map. We asked people to kind of comment on them. Next slide. We did this for all the neighborhoods. Obviously, we're doing this at the same time at the scale of the full project area. Next slide. Because we don't want a plan that's just a laundry list of objectives. We want a plan, right? We want to make sure that all these objectives add up to something greater than the sum of the parts. There are a lot of overlaps and a lot of symbiosis, and also a lot of conflict, right? And so we're looking at this as a whole. This is a draft of a framework plan that's emerging. I think that's the last slide I have. Next. And I think here you just see basically our tasks and deliverables. Next slide. I think Curtis, do you want to talk about next steps?
Just want to ask Dan for clarification. Of the pictures you've shown to us tonight of community engagement, it doesn't include any pictures of community engagement that might have happened prior to the pause.
That's correct, Don. These are just our pictures from this from when we inherited the project.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Curtis. And the next steps that we have for you. So we're going to continue on with drafting the plans. We have a few more analysis to do. We have that framework that you see that we're continuing to work on. A few more engagements, including kind of going to review the draft plan with the community, having another open house, actually one coming up on March 24th. And so we will actually seek to, at a future date, to come back to the planning commission, definitely ask for permission to hold a public hearing. And at a future date, we will seek a public hearing, get the community members here to see all their hard work too, and we'll seek adoption. At
Let
this
me
point, I'll ask any questions or
ask a
comments.
question.
Yes.
About NGA and their participation at all in the planning process, or their outreach? Do they have a mechanism for outreach at all in the community?
So I can't speak on behalf of the NGA and their outreach mechanisms, but this team has been meeting with representatives of the NGA. And even early in this process, there was a survey of NGA employees with the former director of SLDC and also people of NGA too. So yes, they have been. Some of this, we do try to look at what different employees of NGA might like and enjoy, but also balancing that with residents and other community members who live here and pay taxes here too.
And earlier in the process, the NGA team was inviting neighborhood people to come in and have some nightly meetings, actually in the ancillary facilities that put up on the NGA site during the construction.
And I just want to add that SLDC, we have a standing meeting with NGA, and they also do come to our open houses as well as make appearances at MPC meetings. So as they're setting for opening, we've been engaged the entire time.
So do you have a process going forward, I guess, to keep that interaction going, or you said there was a regular meeting? Or
So I can talk. So as of right now, we are, again, in the finalizing pieces of our existing condition report, market analysis, and ultimately creating a funding and implementation metric. The idea is using this data to move forward with a strategic resource committee, which is a conglomeration of internal agencies and offices at SLDC, PDA, the mayor's office, and the city, as well as external stakeholders who also have stake in the game as far as investment and development opportunities. So this will be a continuous engagement as we move forward with funding and implementation, or funding and implementing objectives, or trying to fund and implement objectives highlighted in the neighborhood plan.
And one great perspective that we have as well, even as far as neighborhood managers, while we are working on getting these plans ready for plan adoption, we are the continuation after the project as well. So when there are no more consultants, we also will continue to engage with these NPCs that are established, as well as the strategic resource group that we're going to have that does include NGA.
Questions from the commissioners?
I think the short answer, what they just said, is they're implementing the plan.
I guess, what's the next step for the next planning commission meeting? You're asking, is that the meeting where you're asking for permission to have a public hearing?
Yes, we would.
Okay. And then the public hearing would be in May?
Maybe in June.
Okay.
As soon as you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, how's everyone doing? So the next item, we invited the team leading the zoning code overhaul to come present, kind of introduce themselves, present a little bit about the process ahead. We're still early in the process, but I think it is definitely time to bring the commission in to meet the team, hear about a little bit about the schedule, and again, kind of get to know team and the work ahead. Also felt like this would be helpful to provide a little bit of this context before the priorities discussion. So with that, I'll invite Colin Scarf, who's the principal of Code Studio, leading the team working on this, to share his screen and provide a presentation.
Thanks, Miriam. Hello, everybody. Name is Colin Scarf from Code Studio. Pleasure to be here this evening. Just wanted to meet you guys, meet everybody, say hello, give you an opportunity to ask some questions to me and the other folks on my team. So just kind of a really quick presentation here, really. So if you want to just change the next slide. So just going to introduce you briefly to the kind of the full set of folks that are working on this project, and then talk to you a little bit about the process and the timeline for the project, and then just touch on a couple of places that we've worked on before. And then we really just wanted to talk to you briefly about the Sloop implementation memo that you guys might have seen last month. Next slide. So Code Studio, founded back in 2006. We believe in kind of right-sizing plans and codes that require kind of a deep understanding for each community that we work in. We work on both plans and codes. We really focus on kind of vibrant, mixed-use, walkable communities with a real focus on kind of infill and redevelopment. We kind of feel like we're leaders in the preparation of adoptable and easy to understand, easy to use, highly visual kind of development and zoning codes. So next slide. So I think one of the things that we really try hard to do is kind of make zoning as understandable as it can be to folks. We spend a lot of time thinking about how the information is organized and portrayed. We are big proponents of using graphics and tables to summarize as much information as we can for folks, with the goal of, we really want just kind of the general person to kind of not be intimidated by zoning and feel like they can kind of open up the zoning ordinance and kind of just somewhat understand some of the basic rules that might apply to their property or their neighbor's property or other folks within their neighborhood. Next slide. So we kind of work all across the country. So I think we feel like we bring a very broad and knowledgeable perspective to help St. Louis out with this kind of very important effort. So we kind of, we bring a very broad perspective because we kind of do this work all over the country. Next slide. And so just a little bit more about Code Studio. Almost been doing this now for 20 years. I started Code Studio back in 2006. Give or take, we have about 13 or 14 employees working on zoning projects across the company. We kind of have 4 office locations that we work from. So we have an office in LA. Our head office is in Austin, Texas. We have an office in Atlanta, and then Renee works in Toronto. And so, we have done this type of work a lot of times in a lot of different places, kind of across the country for some time now. Next slide. So just a little bit about Code Studio. So as I mentioned, Colin Scarf, I will kind of be the principal in charge for this project. I have Renee Bieberstein with me. He's going to talk to you in a minute a little bit about the work scope and timeline. Renee is going to be kind of the day-to-day project manager, so you'll see Renee's face a lot as part of this effort. And some other folks that you might see as part of Code Studio. So we got Jonathan Cook. He will be helping Renee, kind of like assistant project manager. Jonathan is based in LA with me, and then you might see Asha as well. She's also working in our LA office. And then you may also see Vodka from time to time. So these are some of the faces that will be involved in this project over the next 18 months or so. So we can't do this kind of work by ourselves. So we kind of have a collective supporting the work that we do. So we've got key strategic group helping us with public outreach. So Jessica and Rebecca and Erica will be helping us with that part of the project. And then we'll also be leaning on the support and knowledge of Public Design Bureau. So I'm sure you guys know Liz and Anne-Marie. They will be providing that kind of connection to the Sloop project, and then just kind of providing key guidance as it relates to outreach as part of this project. So some other folks that you might see, you just saw Dan. So we were, Code Studio was part of the SLOOP team. So we were kind of on that team to kind of provide zoning support and guidance so that the work that was done as part of the SLOOP could be kind of translated into zoning. And so we kind of switch roles with Dan and his team. So we're now leading this effort, and then Dan is going to provide support on a variety of things, planning and urban design related, as well as outreach related material. And so then we have a kind of legal support. Mark White, who's based just outside of Kansas City, is a licensed Missouri attorney, and he will be providing legal guidance for this project. Economic support will be provided by a company called RKG. It's very important that work that we do makes economic sense. We want to make sure that the results of our work make sense in the marketplace. And then we have, flooding is an issue in St. Louis. So we wanted to make sure we brought somebody to the team that understands flooding and the idea of what to do in the right places in terms of development. So we got Andy Sternard from Wagner Bull to help us with flooding and resiliency issues as part of this effort. And so we kind of wanted to get a very kind of broad perspective as part of this project. So we've included what we're calling kind of expert advisors. So these folks are going to be showing up in town at key decision points throughout the effort to help provide some of their knowledge. So Peter Park was the planning director in Milwaukee and Denver that went through very similar zoning updates. So we're bringing Peter along to provide his knowledge. Mitchell Silver was the planning director in Raleigh when they went through their code update. So we're bringing Mitchell along to provide some support and guidance. Nori Winter is actually a historic preservation specialist and expert, which we know will be very important just based on the meeting tonight. Nori has worked for over 35 years on kind of design guidelines and that kind of intersection between design and historic preservation. So it's great to have Nori on board. And then Lee Einsweiler, who is part of Code Studio, has been working on zoning for about twice as long as I have. And so he's worked on a lot of different codes in a lot of different places. So we'll be bringing that knowledge and support to this project as well. And so with that, I'm just going to pass it over to Renee real quick, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about just kind of high level how we're going to get this project done and how long it might take.
Thanks very much, Colin. I'm Renee Bieberstein. And just to take you through, before we get into the timeline, just about the overall project goals. And so just at a very high level, here is, why we think that we're doing this project and why it's so important to do it right now in St. Louis. First of all, as you all know, the St. Louis has just completed its new strategic land use plan, the SLOOP. The primary tool for implementing that plan is going to be zoning. So obviously important that we produce a zoning code that's in alignment with the SLOOP and designed to implement its goals, as well as other planning efforts that you have going on. Organization and usability, Colin touched on, our approach to using graphics and other tools to ensure that zoning codes are accessible to not just experts, but the broad public. So certainly one of our goals here is to try to produce a code that's going to achieve those things. Economic development, again, we talked about the involvement of an economic advisor on the team. We know it's a critical consideration in St. Louis. We want to make sure we're removing barriers to good development and allowing as of right the sorts of development you want to see in the city. So we'll mention this a few times tonight, but I think trying to touch on the idea of really trying to understand exactly what you want and trying to bake that into the code from the beginning to make it as transparent as possible and avoid having to go through red tape just to approve matters that everybody agrees are good. At the same time, prohibiting development that's going to be a negative factor to economic development in the surrounding area. High quality built form. A lot of historic zoning codes, so-called Euclidean codes, focus much more heavily on use than form. St. Louis's code is probably one of those, dating back to a much earlier time. We're going to be bringing a lot more form-focused standards into the code. You've previously kind of used form-based code overlays as a bit of a workaround to achieve this. We're hoping to actually bake a lot more of those form standards into the actual base of the code itself. And then finally, again, as Colin touched on earlier, climate resiliency, a whole variety of different topics there, promoting walkability and transit use, but also about trying to mitigate the risks of flooding and an urban heat island effect. So in terms of the timeline, and again, this is still a bit of a high level. We're still working out some of these dates, but we've been working with staff for the past couple of months to just get the back end of the project off the ground and to set up the timeline and the engagement plan. The intent is to do a public kickoff in probably late May, possibly early June at this point, but coming up fairly soon. That would be the very first public engagement events. By the end of the summer, by August, the hope is to get the code audit and diagnostic done. So that's going to be looking at your current code, figuring out where it works, where it doesn't work, where it isn't aligned to the intents of the SLOOP. And then by September, coming up with a conceptual set of zoning districts, of new zoning districts, that would be the basis for the new code. Again, at this point, still at a high level. And then over the course of the next few months, rolling out the draft code in 4 different modules. So beginning with a module that would cover districts and uses. So the individual districts, the form standards, and the uses that would be associated with each one. By January, producing a zoning map of the city that would actually map out those node districts. By March, a set of development standards that would get into things like requirements for parking, for signage, for other types of development form that go beyond the individual districts. And then by April, work on administration for the code. So processes in which approvals would take place, reconsidering some of the processes that you've got in place right now. And then finally, by June of next year, the intent would be to have a complete public review draft ready. Now, notice this is only phase 1 of the project. There's going to be a second phase after this. We're not under contract yet to do that. So that's not the timeline yet. So it's a little bit vaguer at that point. But what will happen after this, probably for the next 6 months to a year following this point, will be to take that public review draft through a rigorous process of public review to get comments, to make revisions as necessary, and to bring that forward eventually for approval. And then whatever needs to take place in the immediate months after that to ensure that everything is in place to make the code an operative one. I'm just going to hand this briefly over to Jessica Payne to speak to the public outreach goals.
Thanks, Renee. I won't take up too much time. Essentially, our goals for engagement are to prepare, engage, and educate through transparency, collaboration, and empowering people to actually understand and use code, as was demonstrated. We want to make sure that our decision makers have buy-in in the process and the results, and that this is all informed and grounded in technical, legal, and practical realities of effective zoning policy. We want to make sure that our Board of Adjustment is involved in this process and ensure that real people, everyday St. Louisans, can effectively use, interpret, and comply with the new zoning code, both in regulations and procedure. We want this to be cognizant of all forms of diversity in the legibility, usability, and substance of the new code. So we're going to ensure that we have a wide array of diverse voices that are substantially involved in this process. And we also want to provide meaningful education so that people can understand better what zoning is, what it isn't, and how it works, how we've arrived at our current zoning policy, and then how we plan to update zoning moving forward as an important tool in creating that positive change that we want to see. And of course, we want to make sure we're meeting and exceeding our legal and procedural requirements as part of this adoption process. Next slide. What tools are we going to use to do that? A variety of tools. I will start by saying that our approach is really rooted in all of the findings from the SLOOP process. We've been working with PDB to really go through those findings, inform our engagement process, and really learn from that vision that was created through that very extensive engagement that's been going on for the last year and a half or so. But this process will be guided by the community through an advisory committee, various topical working groups that will inform those modules that Renee mentioned, focus groups, stakeholder interviews, and short surveys where it makes sense. We will have regular communications. We're updating the SLOOP website, just sort of rebranding it so we don't lose all of those followers and that traffic that we've had. We're actually building on it. Same with the social media. We're going to keep those same channels, update them with the new name and branding of the zoning process. We'll continue with newsletters, advertisements where needed, press releases, and working with the media to get the word out. We're also going to have education components and workshops with Code Connect events, which will be online and accessible for everybody to come and learn and ask questions. We'll have expert panels and public workshops with some more hands-on activities. We're also going to focus on internal engagement, collaboration amongst city departments. So setting up a cross-departmental working group, a lot of briefings to various city departments and elected officials, and then some test scenario workshops when we get further down in the process to make sure what we're planning for is actually going to work in practice.
Thanks very much, Jessica. I'm just going to pass this back to Colin for a sec to talk about some of our examples of previous work.
Thanks, guys. I guess just wanted to give you a sense that like this is possible and this has been done before. This is a very important effort, but it is manageable, and I think we have the skills and the team pulled together so that we can get this project done. We worked in Denver, was that almost 14, 15 years ago, got the code adopted in 2010. It was one of the country's first kind of form-driven approaches to zoning. It's a by right code for the most part across the entire city. The only part of the city that kind of has subjective review is in downtown. That was just kind of a policy that they wanted to achieve at the time. But for the most part, the entire city development is approved by right at the staff level. And so, you know, it is working. The project stuff is coming out of the ground. So it is nice to look back at these projects. Now that the code's been in place for some time, you can actually see stuff that's coming out of the ground. So here are a couple of examples of, so next slide, please, Renee, of what the project, the code is kind of achieving. So this is just, you know, a kind of underutilized surface parking lot near one of their transit stations or transit stops. And next slide, you'll see kind of how the code has facilitated kind of a very different type of development, a more focused mixed use type of project with buildings pulled up to the street. Next slide. So, you know, it isn't always just kind of, you know, big mixed use projects that we're seeing. Again, this is kind of a surface parking lot. And next slide, you'll see kind of a typical fast food franchise that's doing a pretty good job of addressing the street and activating the pedestrian / public realm with the drive-through tucked behind. So a pretty impressive project there on one of their major commercial corridors. So we also worked on a kind of a more targeted form-based code effort in Chattanooga, Tennessee. That was adopted back in 2016. So we did focus on kind of the extended downtown as part of this effort. And it was kind of a very form-driven effort. Again, a by right code. So projects are approved by right under this code. There is a kind of a committee that can approve modifications to the code. Like if you're looking for additional height, for example, there is a committee that gives applicants additional flexibility. But just some examples of stuff getting built in this under this code. Next slide. You'll see again kind of a underutilized surface parking lot, and then how that might how that transformed into kind of a mixed use project that was built under the new zoning. And then it's not just mixed use housing that's showing up. On the next slide, you'll see again a vacant site and how kind of a new housing product showed up on that site under the new code, and what that looks like. And so next slide, it's we don't just work in kind of fast growing communities. So I just wanted to give you a sense that, you know, we work in some communities that have challenges as well. So we recently completed some work in Cleveland, Ohio. They politically weren't ready to kind of look at redoing their entire citywide zoning. So they wanted to look at things more strategically. So as part of that effort, we got involved in developing some new zoning for the Huff neighborhood, which is a historically African-American community neighborhood. And so we worked with that neighborhood specifically to kind of pull together some new form-based regulations that really met the needs of the folks that lived in that neighborhood. This project happened right in the middle of COVID. So everything for the most part was done online. And we used the support of some local outreach folks that really helped us fine-tune the work for that project. Next slide. And then I'm just going to hand it back over to Renee real quick. He's going to talk a little bit about the SLOOP implementation memo that you guys have seen.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so I think many of you may have already reviewed this. I think this was shared with you. Our team was, or our firm was involved with the SLOOP project throughout the course of that project, partly to kind of start thinking about, you know, how it would be implemented in zoning. Towards the very end of the SLOOP project, we produced a memo talking about two different things. Generally, I'll just give you a kind of quick overview for anybody who's not reviewed that. First of all, about the relationship between zoning and the SLOOP. So of course, zoning is intended to implement the SLOOP land uses at the site level, and it provides a lot of additional nuance beyond the let's say the simpler or higher level land uses that are in the land use plan. It's going to impact not only zoning districts, but also a variety of other overlays and planning tools. And its intention is, as I've said before, is to streamline the code as much as possible by reducing the need for constant variances, and clearly indicating from the outset what's really acceptable, what's not going to be acceptable. So, you know, while there still will be variances and rezonings, hopefully the number of those will be reduced. So because it's going to require less modification, again, by sort of baking in the intents more clearly from the beginning, there's a strong requirement that we get the code right from the first time as much as possible. It won't be perfect, but to try and get it as right as possible. And in order to do that, we're going to require, you know, a really extensive and genuine engagement process during the overhaul to make sure that we hear from everybody up front, as opposed to people coming forward later on when development happens. This is probably obvious to say, but failing to implement new code promptly risks, you know, all kinds of problems with not being able to implement the goals of the plan, which you just approved. In terms of the interim period, so we have a period that's coming up now that's, you know, potentially as long as 2 years, in which you've got the sort of odd combination of a new plan, but you still got your old zoning. For obvious reasons, the old zoning, you know, many decades old, doesn't reflect the intents of the plan that was approved this year. So you've got to deal with this somewhat imperfect situation as best as you can. During that period of time, all as of right, by right zoning permissions are going to stay in place, of course. So people don't need to be worried about that. However, a lot of what we talked about in this memo is how you deal with new developments that are requiring rezonings or variances. The obvious thing to say is that anything that brings you closer into conformity with the plan's intents should be improved. Those that take you further away from it should not be approved. However, it's worth cautioning that a lot of the SLOOP's land uses, because they're at a relatively high level, do require interpretation and review of context. So just because if you look at a site on the SLOOP map and it says maximum of X number of stories, doesn't mean that every site that's appropriate for every single site there. I think that you understand that, but it requires a certain amount of interpretation. In the interim, we talked about in that memo about using rezonings as much as possible, using your current palette of zones, which for a variety of reasons don't necessarily match the sloop land use categories that well. One potential tool that we would encourage is to do conditional rezonings. So let's say you try and pick a zoning district in your current set that's as close as possible with the intents of the sloop for a site to accommodate a development. But you may be worried that some of the permissions that are associated with that particular district would allow unintended things to happen in the future. So instead, we recommend that you condition that to remove those things. They could be both use-related conditions and they could be form-related conditions, again, to try and bring that as close as possible to the intents of the sloop during this interim period. And then finally, I would recommend that you approach additional text amendments to the existing code cautiously. Not to say you can't do it, but just being careful to really think about all the different consequences that might happen down the road, and what might be given away with those amendments. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I think we're happy to answer any questions that you may have for our team. Thank you.
Well, I'll quickly share a few summarizing thoughts. I mean, I think needless to say, like, this is going to be a big project requiring a lot of careful thinking and attention and partnership. You all will be part of that. I'm glad to have you all with us for this journey. And I think the team you met tonight, or, you know, members of the team you met tonight, I think we've got a great team to help us with this, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. But like they shared, it is possible. Other places have done it, and we can too. And I think another thing to consider is what they shared is a fairly aggressive timeline. We are aware of that as a staff. We, as we've shared before, planning staff and zoning staff are really working arm in arm on this project, and we are trying to kind of organize our time and partnership accordingly, because we kind of got this chance to get it right. So we really want to go all in on it. So very exciting, but I do know there's interest in being able to ask questions about this transition memo, and then of course about any number of things about the project and the team.
I'll just add two quick things. One, we're very much appreciative of the attorney that has Missouri experience. As you know, our zoning code is in Missouri, have some old stuff, so that's great that he's there. And I'll just point out that Tracy, when she had a leadership position with the APA, hosted Rich Silver in St. Louis for dinner, it's a visit. And then for a little bit of interest about Mitch, it mentioned that he had run for Raleigh City Council. He's now a member of the Raleigh City Council, so that would be respected. And he worked in New York City for 8 years as the director.
Yeah, just Rebecca Weaver's on their team now too. So good relationship with her as well.
Old friends and new. All work.
Thank you. Ready? Any questions? Good presentation. Questions? All right. Oh,
We have no more action items tonight.
Correct.
yeah, all information.
Yeah, I guess one question, since our next agenda item is on discussing our priorities, things we would do while this is going on. So I guess one element that was in our memo for priorities, or whether to decide to take up or not, was data centers. Can you speak to how you guys will handle a topic that's not currently addressed in our zoning code now? Is this going to be something that's added in the zoning code overhaul? Like, how do you handle items that are not discussed in our current zoning code?
Is
that for us?
I think.
Yeah,
I think
Colin,
so.
you want to go for it?
Well, go ahead, Miriam.
Oh, I was just gonna share how I heard the question, just like kind of concepts not contemplated in our current code. Will those be integrated in the new code during this process? Is that?
Yeah, I think we'd want to discuss that. I mean, I think we understand that the city needs to keep moving forward with things. I guess we would ask to keep the number of like text amendments down as much as possible during this kind of interim period. But if things like data centers become an issue, I think we're willing to address them and help you folks address them as needed. And I think if we're helping thinking, you guys think about it, then we understand how it might end up in the new system. So we can kind of work with you to make sure that what you guys are doing will ultimately fit within what we will do.
Yeah, the way I imagine, I mean, there are all sorts of modern and emerging land uses that are just kind of not contemplated by our current zoning code, like all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Will they be in the updated code?
I think,
They will-
yes,
yes.
absolutely. So, yeah, the short answer is, yeah, you're, if you look for the uses that are mentioned in your
And-
current code, there's a lot of kind of comically outdated things and a lot of current uses that don't appear in. So certainly we'd use the opportunity to update that. Somebody may have implications on form as well.
Yeah, I think you regulate like the location of telephone booths or something, if I remember correctly.
That was one of them, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll clean that kind of stuff up as well. And I think we'll leave you with a system that helps you do a better job of interpreting in uses that aren't currently in the code. Because no matter what we come up with now, there's going to be uses that are going to show up that we never contemplated in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And so we want to make sure we leave you with the system that lets you interpret new uses into the code appropriately over time.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Planning Commission priorities discussion. Log
So
into that.
I'll provide just a super, well, as quick as I can, the presentation. So here we are. Last fall, roughly, there was a subcommittee of the commission that kind of worked through, hey, what is the best way for us to prioritize and handle ideas that may emerge among commissioners? And what that committee landed on, then what the commission approved, was this new procedure for annual prioritization of sort of proactive items that the commission wants to explore and do. There are a lot of things that will continue to just, in Dawn's words, kind of come over the transom. It is, our responsibility as staff and the responsibility of the commission to take those things up as they come. But other things, maybe especially things like zoning text amendments, which need to be initiated by the planning commission. What is our method for deciding what makes the most sense to do? So the procedure that now the commission has is to annually kind of solicit input from commissioners for staff to draft a memo shared for this March meeting. Here we are, to have a discussion at the March meeting. And then based on that discussion, refine the general strategy and approach for the April meeting. And then kind of what is landed on at the April meeting will be sort of what we stick with. So for the coming year, that's the plan. Certainly things could come up, but generally speaking, that will be the plan. And the context this year is we've got this big zoning code project going. We just adopted the strategic land use plan. And then there's like a bunch of other stuff we're working on. I'm not going to belabor all of that. It's described in the memo provided to commissioners. Things including, if we can go to the next slide. Some additional elements of the comprehensive plan currently in development, including the transportation and mobility plan, the sustainability and climate plan, of course, the neighborhood planning program. You just got an update on one of the active planning areas. We have several others underway and more to begin soon. The city of St. Louis was the successful recipient of a HUD grant to pursue other projects that will alleviate barriers to housing and affordable housing. That involves some activities that PDA will lead, including additional resources for the zoning code overhaul, as well as several other projects such as kind of the creation of pre-approved plans that somebody could just use and run with in kind of specific contexts. And kind of looking at the development process, soup to nuts, and understanding the pain points and the potential ways to improve it. And we are kind of in partnership with other city departments working on any number of things, including kind of environmental planning and flood resilience as a kind of ongoing outgrowth and continuation of the Green Cities Coalition, and the important work to expand green infrastructure in the city, including in ways that will leverage vacant land in high areas with high flood risk. So a lot going on, but there are kind of several items that kind of have been under discussion and consideration for some time, and then sort of emerging challenges identified by staff. And so this list before you on this slide and described in the memo describes 4 different topics that the commission, may decide to guide that, we want to make some moves on these things. So this list is inclusive of commissioner input, as well as sort of staff observations and ideas. The 4 are revising the minimum lot size standards for single-family housing, maybe other housing types, more clearly defining and legalizing accessory dwelling units, which is a use not really defined or contemplated by current code. Doesn't mean these don't get approved other ways, but it's kind of an unclear process, or it's not unclear process. It's a process often involving variances and kind of discretionary approvals for ADUs, potentially defining and permitting cannabis cafes and emerging land use, kind of with the potential to leverage the expanding business opportunities of the marijuana legalization, and then also data centers. This is an issue kind of fueled by the emergence and exponential growth of AI in the country. We see several being built downtown. We have over the last several years. Our current code doesn't really contemplate or address them. And so maybe it's a little bit too easy to build them in places where they don't contribute to the mixed use environment of our city, such as downtown. So kind of thinking about, given the context of where we are, here were sort of the staff considerations for how the commission could think about this, that the priorities should be for kind of issues and opportunities that have been identified through the strategic land use plan or other engagement. Maybe that the focus should be on issues that resolve frequent variance requests, kind of where there's a clear demonstrated demand or a clear demonstrated issue in our code, where if we addressed those, we could make kind of things supported by the plan easier to occur. Maybe a third consideration is there's a clear level of urgency in preventing bad outcomes. I'd kind of put data centers potentially in that category. And then the fourth, this is just staff's point of view, that we should try to generally complete these near-term text amendments within this current calendar year, so that once there's a bunch of new draft code generated by the zoning code overhaul, the attention and focus can be on that. And by attention and focus, I mean of staff, of the commission, and also just the general public. I think, as I think about this, I want to make sure we don't have sort of competing streams of engagement where we confuse or exhaust or fatigue the community. I did add a note that other things might simply come up. This is before my time, but I understand in the past, the court has mandated the city to make certain zoning updates because, there's a court case and the finding leads to that resolution. So staff, if something like that happens, of course, we would inform the commission, and that may impact other things that we do. So I have a slide each describing the 4 ideas that were up on that first slide. But I also don't need to present that in detail. Maybe we can just jump into discussion.
Like before we got into each of them, I kind of would like to speak about why we put forward some options.
Your discussion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, planning commissioners, for still being here. I'll keep my comments short and maybe we can go into these more in depth at the next meeting or, I just wanted to, share, the president's office, took a great deal of thought into what we put forward for your consideration. In our office, we have more than 10 items, zoning code text amendments that we were interested in addressing. Now, while setting priorities, you can't do it all. But we wanted to present to you ones that were, had some variation of easy, important, and impactful. So, from the perspective of the Board of Aldermen, alder people hear from constituents all the time, about things they want to do or problems that they're seeing. And so, we wanted to present some options that we thought were achievable and were important. We sent along short 2-page memos on each of those topics that we presented to you, just to really give a sample of what the work that would be required to do. We cannot take action on any of these issues without you, without the Planning Commission initiating. So several of these ideas have been attempted by alders in the recent history. So for each of these that we presented, we have alders identified that want to champion the legislation. So for minimum lot size, it's Alderman Cone. For ADUs is Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, and she even introduced a bill last session that she couldn't move forward because the Planning Commission did not take action. And then cannabis cafes would be Alderman Rasheen Aldridge. And he has threatened to introduce legislation with or without the Planning Commission's approval. So we are trying to balance that and build in a new process by which we're kind of being conscientious of planning staff time, but also know that there's a policy team and policymakers at the Board of Aldermen that are absolutely cognizant that there's going to be a lot of community discussion about some of these items. And not all of that has to be on the backs of planning staff and planning commissioners. If there are any changes to recommendations by the Planning Commission, we now have a rule where it'll come back before us. If Board of Aldermen through their hearings and discussions with each other decide to make amendments, they can come back before the Planning Commission at that time. And also, we did want to take into consideration things that would might not necessarily be covered by the zoning code overhaul. Some of them might be, like ADUs might be, but just having that in mind, trying to be conscientious about, is this something we can wait for? And we're going to be petitioning you that these are things we would not like to wait 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years for change. So that's just kind of my overall comments about the kind of the things that we put forward for the Planning Commission's consideration.
Well, I'll just quickly share that staff, I mean, of course, we reviewed the ideas put forward. We do think each is achievable in a shorter time frame. So yeah, I do want to clarify any use we want to define and regulate in our city will be addressed by the zoning code overhaul. So it's not a mutually exclusive thing, kind of anything we do now or do later that will be covered in the zoning code overhaul.
So I'm happy to say a little bit more about the last one that we had on first. So I think minimum lot size ADUs, people are familiar with that. The one that you might be less familiar with is cannabis cafes. And just the only thing I wanted to add here that wasn't in our memo is right now it is illegal to consume cannabis in public places. So I would, if I were to amend my memo, I would add this as a risk of inaction, is that It's legal in the city of St. Louis to purchase cannabis, but it's not legal to consume it anywhere but at your home. And if you're a renter, you have to have permission of your landlord. So really, it's when we're in a uncertain era of law enforcement and changes at the federal level, we really, I think it's important to pass laws that allow people to do things that are normal in this day and age. It's important to pass laws that to legalize consumption. So having safe spaces for people to be people and be in community with each other. So that's another variable I want to just bring up. It's not just an economic development issue. I think it's it could be a civil rights issue if we do not take action. And the state has allowed us, they're allowing us to pass regulations on this issue today, which is not the usual. The usual. So we have, the state statute permits us to pass regulations that allow consumption. And so I think it's imperative that we do that on behalf of our residents. That's all.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Online, any questions?
Just
Mary, I guess
super
we-
excited about ADUs. Everybody
Excellent.
knows.
And what I heard you say is we can do these. Yes.
Yeah, we can. I think all of it, like, I've personally just been so in the weeds of like, what should we do first? How do we do it? And, how do we make sure we do this without distracting from the zoning code overhaul? Like, I see benefit to action on all of these now. I do see some potential trade-offs for that. And so I'm very interested in the commission's input and guidance.
Any other?
You're not
Not
asking
today.
us to rank these now, or sorry, you're not asking us to rank these now or any
Mhm.
input? No? Okay, just making sure. I wanted to know what the ask was.
Well, I think the idea of the procedure, but it's like,
Not to
it
extend
is
the meeting.
late and I don't know who might have the bandwidth for a discussion. But the idea was like, we would discuss in March and then we would come back in April with a kind of like, here's what we heard, here's what we're going to do. We could divert slightly from that just because this has been such a long meeting, but at your discretion.
I guess my only question is, were there any topics that were missed that you think should be considered?
Staff health, staff.
Which we would always keep in mind. Nope, great. Excellent. Thank you so much. It's exciting to hear. You can blend those in. All right, let's see. How about a quick update on other major planning initiatives?
They are underway. I think the big news is today, the responses to the RFP for plan areas 4 through 6 were due. I haven't reviewed them all, but we got a lot of responses. So exciting news there. And that selection process interview and selection process will be occurring over the next few weeks, including some of our commissioners who are on that formally formed selection committee.
Executive Director's report.
Sure. Any other update on major planning initiatives, Scott?
Oh, sorry.
30 seconds? No? Thank you. Director's report, a couple things. We have a very dedicated, hardworking, small staff, remind you of that. Bob Bettis, who is here, has just filled 2 vacancies that were in the Office of Telco Resources. So that's good. Appreciate that. We are sending to a conference at the end of March, the American Planning Association conference in Denver. We're sending a broader breadth of our staff than we have in the past on purpose to help get them, one, the spirit of working with other planners, spirit of that, and to have them explore in their time there some different lanes for them to go to concentrations of best practice, sessions and one lane and somebody else do another lane. I'm involved in giving a number of sessions, hosting a breakfast, and Denver's my old town, so that's kind of fun. We certainly did the action and review of a demolition that's come to us, that we approved, that we come to this stage. The one that we did about, on Clayton, which we said, yeah, we're not taking it to the stage, that we're just took up the one, tonight. It now has a court date of October 6th. For their time in court.
Clayton.
Clayton, yeah, the Clayton. Yeah, not the Clayton City, the Clayton Avenue one, where we all remembered they were tearing it down and put up a park. And the last thing, as I look at the clock and thinking about the 250 planning commission meetings I've been to, I don't think this is quite the latest running one, but it might be the latest running one of one that we started on time. It's pretty close. Luck done to this.
On that note, thank you everyone for sticking with us, whether here or on the phone. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move. Second.
We are adjourned. Have a good evening. Have a good week.
They knew I had a man.
That was exhausting.
Oh.